The harbor of Alexandria lay beneath a restless sky. The waves pressed against the stone breakwaters, carrying with them the scent of salt, tar, and smoke. The city itself flickered with an orange glow, firelight rising above rooftops, bleeding into the night. Sparks drifted upward, scattered like faint constellations before dissolving into darkness. Within that glow, silence reigned where once voices had filled the air. Papyrus scrolls, stacked in their thousands, curled inward as the flames consumed them. Ink ran in the heat, black letters dissolving into nothing. Each brittle crackle marked the vanishing of an idea, a discovery, a name. No single blaze defined the loss of the Great Library. Yet the image has persisted across centuries. Shelves collapsing into embers, entire civilizations of thought turned to smoke. The truth, historians remind us, is less theatrical and far more uncertain. There may never have been one dramatic inferno. Instead, the library's death may have stretched across centuries. Pieces of it eroded during Julius Caesar's siege of Alexandria in 48 BCE, when flames leapt from burning ships and spread into nearby warehouses. Later wars, imperial neglect, and decrees against pagan learning may have cut away more of its collections. Perhaps there was no single night of fire, no climactic destruction. Perhaps the library was lost slowly, like a shoreline eaten away by tides. But the myth of one burning, one irreversible catastrophe, survives because it is easier to imagine knowledge vanishing in a single gasp of flame. And what knowledge it might have been. Ancient writers spoke of hundreds of thousands of work scrolls gathered from every harbor, every port, every caravan that reached Egypt. It is said that ships docking at Alexandria were searched, and their manuscripts seized, copied, and stored within the library's halls. Within those walls may have been Egyptian medicine older than pyramids, Babylonian records of the stars, Indian treatises on mathematics, Greek tragedies and comedies that never survived elsewhere, works of lost philosophers, entire schools of thought reduced to rumor. Imagine what those flames carried away. What if heliocentric models of the solar system had endured centuries before Copernicus? What if detailed accounts of surgery, inoculation, or herbal cures had advanced medicine a millennium early? What if maps had revealed distant continents recorded by forgotten travelers, waiting to be rediscovered long before Columbus? The library's destruction was not only the loss of parchment, it was the loss of futures that never arrived. Odd fact, the earliest surviving catalog of a library comes not from Egypt, but from Mesopotamia. In the ruins of Nineveh, clay tablets list titles and subjects once housed in Ashurbanipal's royal library over 600 years before Alexandria. Unlike papyrus, clay endured. Knowledge, however, does not always follow the most durable medium. In Alexandria, fragile scrolls contained a weight of wisdom greater than empires, yet they lasted less than stone inscriptions carved to honor kings. The contrast reminds us how delicate human achievement can be. A monument of granite may stand for 4,000 years, but a discovery written in ink can vanish overnight. On the modern shore of Alexandria, the sea still murmurs. Waves rise and fall as they once did in the Ptolemaic age. Yet beneath the water lie ruins, columns toppled by earthquakes, statues swallowed by silt, fragments of a city once called the Bride of the Mediterranean. Divers retrieve relics, but never scrolls. Papyrus leaves no trace on the ocean floor. Knowledge can die completely, leaving only silence. Still, the memory of the library endures. It haunts us because it asks an unanswerable question. What if it had survived? Picture, for a moment, the hours after the fire. The harbor is quiet. Fishermen rowing home see the haze above the city, the sky painted red by embers, but they cannot know what has been lost. To them, it is another battle, another blaze in a restless world. Only later generations, piecing together fragments, realized the scale of what had disappeared. And yet even they could not measure it. For how can one grasp the weight of an absence? How can one describe knowledge that no longer exists? The library's death became more than history. It became symbol. It represents the fragility of progress, the ease with which centuries of discovery can collapse into nothing. It embodies the thought that civilizations do not only rise and fall in stone and blood, but also in silence, when memory itself turns to ash. This is why the story of its burning endures. It is not the tale of one building's fall. It is the tale of humanity's greatest unanswered question. What wisdom slipped beyond our reach forever? And so the journey begins here, among smoke and ruin. The Great Library of Alexandria is gone, but its shadow stretches across time. For if those scrolls had survived, if that knowledge had endured, the world we know might have been utterly different, perhaps brighter, perhaps darker, but certainly not the same. The embers fade. The harbor sleeps. The question remains, what if the Great Library of Alexandria was never destroyed? Dawn broke over Alexandria with the slow shimmer of light across the Mediterranean. The waves turned from black to silver, gulls wheeled above the harbor, and the marble colonnades of the city gleamed faintly in the rising sun. Ships swayed at anchor, Phoenician traders, Greek merchants, Egyptian barges, vessels from as far east as India, drawn to this new city founded by a conqueror and dreamed into grandeur by his heirs. It was here, in this bustling crossroad of cultures, that the idea of a library, unlike any other, took root. Not a collection of scrolls for a temple or a king, but a universal archive, an attempt to gather the entire memory of the known world. The story begins with Alexander the Great. In 331 BCE, he ordered a city built on Egypt's northern coast. He did not live to see it finished, but his successors, the Ptolemies, made Alexandria their capital. They imagined a city not only of commerce, but of learning, a beacon that could rival Athens, Babylon, and every other seat of knowledge. Ptolemy the first of his line, envisioned a cultural monument to legitimize his rule in a foreign land. His successor, Ptolemy II, gave form to that vision. He raised a grand institution near the royal quarter, close to the palaces and gardens. Within its walls, knowledge would be gathered, studied, and preserved. The Greeks called it the Mausion, the place of the muses, goddesses of art and science. Attached to it was the Great Library. Unlike smaller libraries of the ancient world, this one sought not just excellence, but totality. Every book, every scroll, every record nothing less than the sum of human thought. Ships docking in Alexandria were searched, and manuscripts seized. Originals were copied by scribes, then stored in the library, while the duplicates were returned to their owners. Caravans from Mesopotamia, envoys from India, travelers from distant lands, all were asked to contribute their texts. It is said that soon hundreds of thousands of scrolls lined the shelves. Some ancient accounts speak of 400,000, others of 700,000. The numbers may be exaggerated, but the ambition was real. The world's first attempt to hold all knowledge under one roof. Picture the halls as they might have looked. Sunlight filtering through lattice windows. The smell of papyrus and ink mingling with cedar oil that kept insects at bay. Scholars walking in silence between shelves, robes brushing against the stone floor. A low murmur of debate rising from courtyards where philosophers argued about geometry, medicine, or the motion of the stars. Here was not only a library, but a community. The Mausion was also a research center with lecture halls, botanical gardens, and living quarters for scholars. Those who worked here received stipends, food, and lodging, freeing them to devote themselves to study. It was a university before the word existed. The ambition was staggering. In Alexandria, the rulers dreamed of making Egypt not just a political power, but an intellectual empire. The Ptolemies sought to surpass Athens by gathering the works of Aristotle, Plato, Sophocles, and then stretching further into Babylonian astronomy, Indian medicine, Egyptian rituals, even the oral traditions of travelers who knew no writing at all. Legend tells that Ptolemy III ordered every book in the world copied for Alexandria. When Athens sent prized manuscripts of Euripides, Aeschylus, and Sophocles for duplication, the Ptolemaic court kept the originals and returned the copies. Such was their hunger for wisdom, or perhaps their hunger for prestige. But the library was more than politics. For those who entered, it must have felt like stepping into eternity. Knowledge from countless generations lay side by side, each scroll a fragile thread in a vast tapestry. To unroll a papyrus from India was to hear distant voices across oceans. To study a Babylonian star chart was to glimpse skies from another age. Odd fact, the Greek geographer Eratosthenes, who worked in Alexandria, measured the circumference of the Earth with remarkable accuracy around 240 BCE. Using shadows cast at different locations, he calculated a figure only slightly off from modern measurements. Without the resources of the library, without access to records from distant lands, such insight might never have been possible. Here we see what the library was not only a vault of memory, but a forge of discovery. Yet legend wraps around fact. Some later writers claimed that the library contained secret histories of entire civilizations, records of vanished continents, perhaps even wisdom carried from times before the flood myths. Others imagined that it held blueprints for machines, formulas for materials, or star charts that reached back into prehistory. We cannot know how much is myth and how much is possibility, but we can sense the aura that surrounded the place. To the ancient mind, the Library of Alexandria was not just a building. It was an ark of knowledge, a vessel carrying the thoughts of humanity across time. Its scale awed even those who never saw it. Writers in distant cities spoke of it with reverence, though none could describe its halls with certainty. The truth of its architecture, its precise catalog, and its daily life remains hidden. What survives are fragments, rumors, and the lingering weight of its ambition. For in that ambition lay something unprecedented, the dream of completeness. Other cultures collected wisdom for their own use, for priests, kings, or narrow circles of scholars. Alexandria, for all its flaws, sought universality. In its own way, it was the first attempt to build a memory for all humankind. Standing in that dawn light, watching the harbor fill with sails, one can imagine the pride of the Ptolemaic rulers. They had built not only palaces and lighthouses, but a sanctuary of the mind. Within those walls, they believed they had captured the very essence of civilization. The library's birth was a wonder not because of its architecture or size, but because of its vision. It dared to imagine that knowledge itself could be gathered, ordered, and preserved, that nothing need be lost, that memory could triumph over time. And yet, as we know, memory is fragile. The greater the treasure, the greater the risk. The story of its fall would come later. But in its birth, the Library of Alexandria stood as the most daring intellectual experiment the ancient world ever attempted. Step across the marble threshold of the Mouseion. The sound of the harbor fades, replaced by a hush so deep it seems almost sacred. The air is thick with the scent of ink, oil lamps, and the faint dust of papyrus. Light filters through high windows, falling in golden shafts across shelves stacked with scrolls. Here, in this labyrinth of words, lies the memory of worlds. For most of history, the contents of the Great Library of Alexandria remain a mystery. No catalog survived. No list of titles, no index of treasures. What we know comes only from scattered references, fragments, quoted by later writers, hints buried in letters, whispers preserved in rumor. And yet, from these shards, we can begin to imagine what may once have filled these halls. First, the wisdom of Egypt itself. Alexandria stood on the soil of a land already ancient. Long before Greek philosophers debated the nature of matter, Egyptian priests studied medicine, astronomy, and engineering. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, a surgical text from around 1600 BCE, shows an understanding of diagnosis, wounds, and even brain injuries. If such works survived in abundance at Alexandria, physicians might have carried forward treatments and surgical techniques centuries before their rediscovery. Imagine a shelf of scrolls on anatomy, each unrolling to reveal detailed notes on organs, bones, and blood flow. Picture recipes for antiseptics or plant-based remedies tested through generations. Could antibiotics, long hidden in nature, have been discovered earlier if those scrolls had endured? Next, the wisdom of Mesopotamia. From Babylon and Sumer came records of the stars. Clay tablets etched with cuneiform describe lunar eclipses, planetary cycles, and complex mathematical calculations. The Babylonians predicted celestial events with surprising accuracy, and their methods influenced Greek astronomy. Within Alexandria, such knowledge could have met Greek geometry, fusing observation with theory. Some scholars speculate that heliocentrism, the idea of the Earth circling the Sun, may already have been argued in lost works. Aristarchus of Samos proposed it in the 3rd century BCE, but his writings survive only in fragments. What if complete arguments, tables of planetary motion, or even star maps existed among the scrolls? Our understanding of the cosmos might have leapt forward by millennia. From India, caravans carried not only spices and jewels, but also manuscripts. Indian mathematics included the early concept of zero, negative numbers, and sophisticated geometry. The Asalba Sutras, ancient texts, contained rules for constructing altars with precise ratios, echoing ideas of trigonometry. If such texts reached Alexandria, Greek scholars could have encountered the seeds of modern mathematics long before they appeared in medieval Europe. The merging of Indian numerals with Greek calculation might have birthed algebra centuries ahead of time. With it, engineering, navigation, and trade could have transformed in ways we can scarcely imagine. And from Greece itself, countless works of art and philosophy. We know the tragedies of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides only through a handful of plays. Ancient records suggest that each wrote over 100. Where are the rest? Perhaps stacked in rows within the library, awaiting readers who never came. Philosophical schools, too, may have had entire bodies of writing lost to time. Epicurus, Zeno, Democritus, many of their works exist only as quotes preserved by later thinkers. What nuances of thought, what branches of philosophy might we have known had their complete writings survived? Odd fact, a single line preserved from the philosopher Heraclitus reads, "You cannot step into the same river twice." That single sentence has shaped centuries of reflection on change and time. Yet Heraclitus wrote an entire book, lost but for fragments. Imagine the river of thought that could have flowed from a complete text. The library may once have held it. Beyond literature and philosophy, there may have been records of engineering. The Egyptians mastered monumental architecture. How did they lift stones weighing hundreds of tons? How did they align pyramids with such precision to the cardinal points? Papyrus scrolls, written by builders or overseers, could have explained techniques long debated. Were they simple but ingenious methods of labor and leverage, or knowledge now forgotten entirely? Some have speculated that even the secrets of lost technologies may have been recorded. Hero of Alexandria, writing centuries later, described steam-powered devices, automatic doors, and water organs. If his texts survived, might they have been inspired by earlier records kept safe in the library? Could the ancient world have contained prototypes of engines, mechanics, or chemistry, forgotten when the scrolls turned to ash? And what of distant lands? Caravans traveled the Silk Road, linking Egypt with China. Did manuscripts arrive describing gunpowder, magnetism, or medicine centuries before Europe discovered them? Some suggest that maps of unknown continents may have been stored here, records of travelers who reached further than we realize. Could the library have contained accounts of voyages across the Atlantic or Pacific? stories dismissed as myth because the evidence perished. Legend also whispers of stranger works, texts said to preserve memories from civilizations before history. Myths of Atlantis, Lemuria, or flood-swept worlds may have had their echoes in Alexandria. While such claims cannot be proven, they reveal how the library became a canvas for imagination. It was not only a collection of scrolls, but a symbol of possibility. Anything lost, anything dreamed, could be believed to have once rested on its shelves. Picture again the interior. A scholar unrolls a papyrus, eyes scanning rows of symbols. Another debates geometry with colleagues in the courtyard. A physician copies an Egyptian medical text while across the hall. A poet studies Homer. The library was not silent storage. It was alive, a hive of voices, each scroll a doorway into another time and place. But therein lay the tragedy. For when fire touched papyrus, when neglect allowed dust and decay, these voices fell silent forever. Unlike stone monuments, unlike temples carved in granite, knowledge written on fragile reeds could vanish in an instant. Today, we hold fragments, copies, echoes, quotations. Enough to suggest the scale of what was lost, never enough to satisfy. The contents of the library remain a riddle, a puzzle with most of its pieces missing. Yet in imagining what it held, we glimpse the immensity of human potential. The scrolls of Alexandria remind us that knowledge is never inevitable. Civilizations rise, gather wisdom, and sometimes lose it all. Progress is not a straight line but a fragile thread, and when it snaps, entire futures can disappear. In these halls once lay the secrets of medicine, mathematics, astronomy, poetry, and perhaps civilizations older than memory, all gathered in one place, bound not by stone walls but by ambition, the desire to capture the sum of the world. The Library of Alexandria was not merely a storehouse. It was a mirror of humanity's greatest dream, that knowledge could be eternal. But eternity is fragile. The Great Library of Alexandria did not rise from pure devotion to wisdom. It was also born from rivalry, from ambition, from the hunger of kings who understood that knowledge could be the sharpest weapon of empire. The Ptolemies who ruled Egypt after Alexander's death faced a delicate balance. They were outsiders, Greek conquerors, in a land ancient beyond measure. Their power depended not only on armies and fleets, but also on legitimacy. To endure, they needed to transform Alexandria into more than a military stronghold. It had to become the beating heart of culture, a city that could rival Athens in philosophy, Babylon in astronomy, and Memphis in sacred tradition. And so, the Mausoleum and its library became more than sanctuaries of learning. They became monuments of prestige, carefully cultivated symbols of authority. To own the knowledge of the world was to claim dominion over the world itself. The Ptolemaic strategy was clear. Every ship docking in Alexandria was searched. Manuscripts carried by merchants or envoys were seized, copied by trained scribes, and deposited into the library. Originals were often kept, while duplicates were returned. This was not courtesy. It was conquest by ink. Through this policy, Alexandria absorbed not only Greek works, but also the lore of Egypt, Babylon, Persia, and India. Scroll by scroll, the Ptolemies turned their capital into a fortress of intellect. The message was unmistakable. Athens had once been the wellspring of philosophy, but Alexandria would be the future. The torch of knowledge was shifting south, into the hands of kings who claimed to be heirs of Alexander and stewards of all civilization. Knowledge was also a tool of diplomacy. The library drew scholars from across the Mediterranean, offering them stipends, lodging, and prestige. To be invited to Alexandria was an honor, a declaration that one's voice mattered in the great conversation of humankind. Philosophers, poets, mathematicians, and physicians came, not only to learn, but also to lend the city their reputations. In this way, the Ptolemies bought loyalty not with gold alone, but with the promise of immortality. A text preserved in Alexandria could endure for centuries. A discovery recorded there could echo across the world. For scholars, the library was a path to legacy. For kings, it was a way to weave authority into the fabric of memory itself. Odd fact, the Ptolemies were not shy about their ambitions. Ptolemy II is said to have ordered copies of every Greek play to be kept in Alexandria, effectively rewriting Athens' cultural heritage into Egypt's possession. Later rulers pursued similar policies, ensuring that Alexandria would be seen as the rightful guardian of Hellenistic civilization. This hunger extended to religion as well. Alexandria became a place where Egyptian gods stood beside Greek deities, where Jewish texts were translated into Greek, the famous Septuagint, under royal patronage. By absorbing sacred writings into their collection, the Ptolemies placed themselves at the crossroads of faith as well as science. But the politics of knowledge carried darker undertones. A library so vast, so central, concentrated power as surely as an army. To control information was to shape narratives, to decide which voices endured and which were forgotten. The Ptolemies could elevate their dynasty by preserving some texts and suppressing others. Here lies one of history's ironies. The library promised universality, yet it was guided by kings with ambitions. It sought to preserve all knowledge, yet it was also an instrument of selective memory. The scrolls inside represented the world, but the choices of what was copied, what was translated, and what was stored revealed the fingerprints of power. Consider the rivalry with Athens. For centuries, Athens had been the intellectual jewel of the Greek world, home to Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. By assembling their library, the Ptolemies sought to surpass it, to make Alexandria the new Athens of the Mediterranean. Scholars who once might have dreamed of teaching in the Lyceum were now drawn to the Mausoleum. The competition was not subtle. The Ptolemies boasted of their collections, expanded aggressively, and positioned Alexandria as the supreme city of thought. Athens had philosophers. Alexandria had everything. The politics of knowledge reached even into legend. Stories circulated that the library held secrets of powerful technologies, formulas for metals, designs for machines, recipes for medicines. Whether true or not, the idea served the rulers well. It cast Alexandria as not only a treasury of the past, but also a vault of the future. To control such a place was to claim mastery over time itself. For rival powers, this was both awe-inspiring and threatening. Rome, Carthage, Pergamon all watched Alexandria with wary admiration. Each recognized that books could be as formidable as legions. Yet the Ptolemies could not control everything. Power is always fragile. Over time, the same politics that built the library also placed it at risk. Wars, rivalries, and the shifting tides of empire would threaten the fragile scrolls within. The very hunger that brought the world's knowledge to Alexandria would, in time, expose it to fire and neglect. Still, in its prime, the library stood as both a wonder and a weapon. It symbolized a dynasty's claim to rule, a city's claim to supremacy, and a civilization's dream of completeness. The Great Library was never just about wisdom. It was about power, the power to collect, to preserve, to shape the story of humanity itself. For the Ptolemies, it was both crown and shield, a monument that proclaimed, Alexandria is the center of the world, and here, within these walls, the world is ours. Night again over Alexandria. The waves lap against the harbor walls. Moonlight shimmers across the water, and beyond the docks rises the glow of fire. The flames are not legend now, but history recorded by ancient voices who stood witness to the city's turmoil. And within their accounts lies the puzzle that has haunted scholars for centuries. Was the Great Library destroyed in a single catastrophic blaze, or did it die slowly, piece by piece, across the ages? The first great shadow falls in 48 BCE, during a civil war between Julius Caesar and Pompey. Pursued into Egypt, Caesar found himself trapped in Alexandria. To secure his position, He ordered the Egyptian fleet in the harbor set aflame. The fire spread, leaping from ships to warehouses, and from warehouses into the city itself. Ancient sources tell us that scrolls stored near the docks were caught in the blaze. Some accounts claim this was the library itself. Others insist it was only a storage depot, a satellite collection feeding the main halls. Still, one thing is clear. Thousands of manuscripts perished that night. The flames that consumed Caesar's enemies also consumed the words of civilizations. Whether the main library stood untouched or was partially burned remains uncertain, but the memory of fire became inseparable from Alexandria's legacy. Centuries later, the city again became a battleground. During the 3rd century CE, the Roman Emperor Aurelian waged war against Queen Zenobia of Palmyra. In the fighting, much of Alexandria's Brachyon district, where the library was said to stand, was devastated. Records suggest that by this time, the library may already have diminished, its collections fragmented. Still, another portion of its holdings could have been lost in these clashes, another ember in its long decline. Then, in the late 4th century, came a different kind of destruction, less fiery, more deliberate. The Roman world had turned Christian, and pagan temples were increasingly targeted. In 391 CE, Emperor Theodosius I issued decrees banning pagan practices. In Alexandria, the great Serapeum, an extension of the library's collections, was attacked by a Christian mob. Scrolls, statues, and altars were destroyed in the fervor of faith. Here, the fire was not only literal but ideological. Knowledge once revered became suspect, labeled as heresy or idolatry. Whether large or small, another trove of manuscripts was swept away, casualties of a changing world. Odd fact, some ancient writers claimed that during the conquest of Alexandria in the 7th century, the city's libraries were finally destroyed by order of the Caliph Umar. The story tells that the scrolls were used as fuel to heat bathhouses for months. Modern historians doubt the tale, seeing it as legend created centuries later. Yet its persistence reveals something essential. People needed an ending. They needed a story that explained why no trace of the library remained. Thus, we face the enduring mystery. Was the Great Library destroyed once in a single night of flames? Or was it undone in fragments, century by century, by war, neglect, decree, and accident? The truth may be that there was never one death, but many. Each war chipped away at its collections. Each regime change shifted its priorities. Each act of zealotry burned or scattered scrolls considered dangerous or useless. The library, so ambitious in its birth, may have simply unraveled across generations until nothing recognizable remained. Yet myth prefers clarity. The image of one inferno, one tragic moment when hundreds of thousands of scrolls turn to ash, endures because it captures the imagination. We picture scholars watching helplessly, flames reflected in their eyes, as centuries of wisdom vanished in smoke. It is a scene that can be painted, mourned, retold. But perhaps the reality is even more haunting. A slow, silent erosion. Scrolls eaten by insects. Shelves sagging under neglect. Scholars leaving and not returning. Knowledge not lost to fire in one night, but forgotten in fragments over centuries. No spectacle, only silence. Imagine walking through the halls during those final years. Dust gathers on the shelves. Fewer scholars debate in the courtyards. Lamps burn low, their oil rationed. A few scrolls are taken, copied, or hidden away. Others are discarded as irrelevant to the times. Slowly, the greatest collection of human thought diminishes, not in flames, but in quiet neglect. In the end, which is the greater tragedy? The sudden blaze that sears memory, or the slow fading that leaves nothing to even mourn? The myth of a single fire has survived because it carries weight. It warns of the fragility of progress, the ease with which centuries can vanish in moments. Yet the deeper truth, the truth of many fires, many losses carries a subtler warning. Knowledge does not need fire to disappear. It can be undone by politics, by ideology, by simple indifference. And so the story of the library's destruction is not only about Alexandria. It is about every archive, every manuscript, every fragile thread of wisdom humanity has tried to preserve. The flames of Alexandria remind us that no memory is permanent unless it is carried forward. Whether it burned once or many times, the library's fate left the world with an unfillable void. Somewhere in those vanished scrolls lay discoveries, histories, and voices that could have changed the course of human destiny. The loss was not of one building, but of untold futures. The fires fade, but the ash remains. And from that ash rises the question that still lingers across centuries. Was it one inferno, or 1,000 small deaths? And if knowledge can vanish so easily, what wisdom even now lies at risk of being forgotten? The smoke clears, the embers fade, and we pause. Let us imagine for a moment that the flames never touched the shelves of Alexandria. That war's past, but the scrolls remained. That zealotry thundered, but wisdom endured. That the greatest library ever assembled was never unmade. What then? Picture Alexandria not as a ruin, but as a living city of light. In this world, the halls of the Mauseon remain intact, their courtyards filled with scholars, their shelves heavy with scrolls from every corner of the earth. Lamps burn through the night as physicians study Egyptian medical papyri, astronomers debate Babylonian star charts, and philosophers read works long vanished from our world. Instead of silence, the library continues to speak, century after century, carrying the voice of humanity unbroken through time. The consequences of this survival ripple outward like waves on the Mediterranean. With each preserved text, centuries of human struggle are shortened. With each discovery unlost, entire eras unfold differently. Medicine, mathematics, astronomy, geography, every discipline would have leapt ahead. Perhaps by the 1st century, Rome might have practiced surgeries we did not master until the modern age. Perhaps by the 4th, scholars might have charted the orbits of planets with precision we would only rediscover in the Renaissance. The timeline of history, so often broken and reset, would flow forward without interruption. Odd fact, in our history, the Greek physician Galen wrote extensively on medicine, but many of his works were lost in later centuries. When fragments were rediscovered in Arabic translations 1,000 years later, Europe hailed them as new knowledge. If the Library of Alexandria had safeguarded every medical text, such rediscoveries would have been unnecessary. Humanity might have entered the age of modern medicine in antiquity, but the implications extend beyond science. Imagine literature unbroken, the plays of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides in their entirety, the complete works of Heraclitus, Democritus, Epicurus, poetic traditions from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and beyond, the human voice across centuries, speaking in chorus, without gaps, without silences. How would our sense of self, our philosophy, our art, have evolved if we had heard every word our ancestors left behind? Perhaps entire schools of thought would have thrived, altering the course of religions, ethics, and political systems. Perhaps the very shape of human identity would be different. Geography, too, might have shifted. The library is said to have stored maps and travel accounts gathered from sailors and explorers. If true, then it is possible that knowledge of distant lands Africa's interior, India's coasts, or even the Americas was recorded long before Columbus. If these records had endured, great voyages of discovery might have set sail centuries earlier. Imagine Rome not only ruling the Mediterranean, but sending fleets across oceans, its legions setting foot on continents unknown to us until the 15th century. Imagine trade routes spanning the globe in the time of Caesar, cultural exchanges shaping societies long before our modern age. Astronomy would have leapt forward as well. Aristarchus of Samos proposed a heliocentric model in the 3rd century BCE, yet his writings were mostly lost. If preserved, if taught, if debated, the idea of Earth circling the sun might have become accepted truth in antiquity. The long centuries of geocentric belief, defended with dogma, might never have taken root. In this unbroken world, telescopes may have appeared in the hands of Roman scholars. Star charts might have guided explorers not in the Renaissance, but in the age of Augustus. The dream of reaching the heavens could have taken form not in the 20th century, but perhaps 1,000 years earlier. But let us pause, for speculation is not only about wonder, it is also about danger. Knowledge carries power, and power can be misused. Would Rome, armed with steam engines derived from heroes' forgotten devices, have forged an empire of iron and smoke centuries before Britain's Industrial Revolution? Would conquest have spread faster, more ruthlessly, with advanced weapons in ancient hands? The library's survival could have given humanity cures, voyages, and philosophies beyond measure, but it could also have unleashed engines of war, chemical knowledge, or destructive forces before society was prepared. An unbroken world may have been brighter, but also darker. And yet, the idea continues to haunt us. For what is history but a story interrupted? We rebuild knowledge again and again, piecing together fragments of what was once whole. The Library of Alexandria, had it endured, would have offered humanity a continuous thread, weaving together past and present into a tapestry unbroken by fire. Imagine standing now in those halls, their shelves unburned. The murmur of debate fills the air. A physician studies anatomy centuries ahead of his time. An astronomer plots orbits with a precision that could guide spacecraft. A poet unrolls the complete tragedies of Euripides, tears in his eyes as he reads words unknown to us. This is the world unbroken, a world where no voice was lost, no discovery forgotten, no future delayed. But our world is not that world. We live instead in the aftermath, in the silence left by fire. And it is this silence that makes us wonder all the more. What path might humanity have walked if the Library of Alexandria had never fallen? Step again into the imagined halls of Alexandria. Among the shelves of poetry, astronomy, and philosophy lies another collection of fragile scrolls, filled not with myths or star charts, but with the practical art of healing. Papyrus upon papyrus, written by Egyptian priests, Greek physicians, Indian scholars, and travelers from distant lands. A treasury not of words alone, but of life itself. What might humanity have known had these works endured? Egypt was already a land of medicine. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, written more than 1,000 years before Alexandria's rise, reveals surgical case studies, head injuries, fractures, dislocations. It describes how to examine wounds, how to predict outcomes, how to treat with bandages and honey. The Ebers Papyrus, even older, catalogs hundreds of remedies, herbal infusions, minerals, animal products, many of which modern science has confirmed to have antibacterial or anti-inflammatory properties. If these and other medical scrolls had been preserved in abundance, collected in the library, medicine might have advanced not by trial and error across centuries, but through continuity. A physician in Rome or in medieval Europe might have read directly the accumulated wisdom of Egypt, never losing ground to superstition. From Greece came Hippocrates, whose name survives in the oath doctors still take today. His school emphasized careful observation, natural causes of disease, and the ethics of healing. Yet much of his work, and the writings of his successors, are lost. Galen, centuries later, would inherit fragments and become the authority for over 1,000 years, but even he lamented the missing scrolls. In Alexandria, it is said that both Hippocrates and Galen's works were gathered, alongside writings of lesser-known physicians who may have made discoveries now beyond our reach. Imagine if those voices, instead of vanishing, had shaped a continuous medical tradition. And from India came further treasures. The Ayurvedic texts, such as the Charaka Samhita and Sushruta Samhita described surgery in startling detail: cataract operations, dental extractions, even forms of plastic surgery. They cataloged herbs with healing properties, many still used in traditional medicine today. If such manuscripts reached Alexandrian trade routes, suggest they might have, the library could have housed the world's first truly global medical curriculum. A Roman surgeon could have learned techniques refined in India. An Alexandrian physician might have experimented with herbs from the Himalayas. The fusion of Egyptian, Greek, and Indian traditions could have produced medicine centuries ahead of its time. Odd fact, honey, often prescribed in Egyptian remedies, is now known to have natural antibacterial properties. Willow bark, recorded in ancient texts, contains salicin, a precursor to aspirin. Garlic, mentioned as a treatment for infections, contains compounds still studied for antimicrobial effects. If preserved systematically, these remedies could have guided doctors toward antibiotics long before penicillin's discovery in the 20th century. Consider what this means. Without the long darkness of forgotten knowledge, humanity might have confronted disease far earlier. Smallpox, measles, plague, entire epidemics could have been mitigated, if not prevented. Infant mortality might have fallen, lifespans lengthened. Civilizations might have thrived, unbroken by waves of pestilence that reshaped history. The Black Death of the 14th century killed perhaps 1/3 of Europe's population. What if, armed with ancient texts, physicians had known not only about contagion, but also about prevention, sterilization, or antibiotics? The devastation of medieval pandemics might never have occurred. Surgery, too, might have advanced centuries earlier. The Sushruta text described over 300 surgical procedures and the use of more than 100 instruments. In Alexandria, these writings might have been studied alongside Greek anatomy and Egyptian case records. The result could have been a medical science capable of complex operations, safe amputations, and perhaps even organ surgery long before the modern era. But there is more than healing in these scrolls. Medicine is also about understanding the body itself. Imagine if Alexandrian scholars had preserved and expanded anatomical studies, dissecting with precision, recording with accuracy. Leonardo da Vinci's anatomical sketches astonished the Renaissance because they were so far ahead of their time. Yet in another world, such knowledge might have been commonplace in antiquity, passed directly from Alexandria's archives. Of course, knowledge is never without peril. The ability to heal can also become the ability to harm. Poisons, venoms, and chemical compounds might have been weaponized. The same understanding that leads to antiseptics can lead to toxins. If empires had gained such knowledge too early, they might have wielded it not for healing, but for conquest. This is the double edge of lost medicine. Its absence delayed progress, but its presence could have changed the face of war. Still, one cannot help but wonder at the lives lost. Imagine a Rome where infections after surgery were rare, where childbirth carried less risk, where epidemics were contained. Imagine medieval Europe spared the plagues that hollowed its cities. Imagine empires rising not on the bones of the sick, but on the strength of healthier populations. The ripple effects would be immense. With fewer losses to disease, societies might have expanded faster. Education, art, and technology might have flourished earlier. The Renaissance could have dawned not in the 15th century, but a millennium before. Odd microstory? In the ruins of Herculaneum, scrolls carbonized by volcanic ash still exist, fragile and unreadable to the naked eye. Modern technology now begins to uncover their words. If such fragments survived fire, imagine what the complete, carefully preserved holdings of Alexandria might have revealed. Within those papyri could have been cures we only stumbled upon centuries later. In the end, the medicine of Alexandria remains a dream glimpsed in fragments. We know just enough to sense what was possible, never enough to be certain. And so we ask, what futures might have opened had the library survived? A world where antibiotics were brewed in Roman apothecaries, where surgery saved emperors and peasants alike, where pandemics never swept the globe. The library could have been the difference between centuries of suffering and centuries of healing, between a fragile humanity and one far stronger, far sooner. But history took another path. The scrolls burned, the cures were lost, and progress was delayed. And so we stand here, centuries later, haunted by the thought, what if medicine had been centuries ahead? In the stillness of Alexandria's halls, some scrolls were not filled with poetry or medicine, but with diagrams, sketches of wheels, gears, levers, and pipes. Among the words of poets and the maps of stars, there existed blueprints for machines, inventions that hinted at worlds not yet born. If the library had endured, it might have preserved the key to an ancient industrial revolution, one that could have dawned not in the 18th century, but in the shadow of the Roman Empire. One figure stands at the heart of this speculation. Hero of Alexandria, a mathematician and engineer of the 1st century CE. From the fragments of his surviving texts, we know he designed astonishing devices, automatic doors powered by steam, fountains that operated without human touch, even a steam-powered engine called the eolipile. The eolipile was a simple sphere mounted on an axis, with nozzles that vented steam. When heated, it spun, harnessing the pressure of vapor into motion. In our history, it was dismissed as a curiosity, a toy for temples and demonstrations. But in another world one, where the library preserved and amplified such knowledge, this spinning globe might have been the seed of a revolution. Consider what might have followed. If Hero's devices were not isolated curiosities, but parts of a tradition recorded and expanded, then the Romans could have applied steam to more than showmanship. Picture Roman workshops filled with pistons and turbines, machines driving hammers and saws. Picture ships propelled not by oars and sails, but by steam engines cutting across the Mediterranean. Picture roads filled with wheeled carts, drawn not by horses, but by engines hissing with power. The leap from curiosity to application requires continuity, and continuity was precisely what the library promised. Every idea, preserved and studied, could build upon the last. Instead of being forgotten, Hero's steam devices might have been refined, expanded, and mass-produced. The Industrial Revolution, which reshaped the 18th century, might have reshaped the first. Odd fact, the Romans already had the infrastructure. Their aqueducts carried water across continents. Their roads spanned thousands of miles. Their empire demanded grain, goods, and movement on a massive scale. What they lacked was motive power beyond muscle, wind, and water. If the library had safeguarded the secrets of steam, the empire might have transformed into something almost unrecognizable, a machine-driven civilization centuries ahead of its time. But Hero was not alone. Ctesibius of Alexandria, a century earlier, invented water pumps, force engines, and even a form of compressed air catapult. Philo of Byzantium described gears, levers, and mechanical tricks that hinted at automation. The Antikythera mechanism, an ancient Greek device recovered from the sea, shows that complex gear work was possible long before the Renaissance. If such knowledge had been gathered in the library, combined and refined, it might have pushed humanity into mechanical mastery long before our age. Imagine the consequences. With machines replacing muscle, labor would change forever. Slavery, the engine of Roman economics, might have diminished as mechanical power grew. The social fabric of the empire could have shifted, freeing human minds and bodies for other pursuits. Science might have accelerated, art expanded, philosophy deepened, not centuries later, but within antiquity itself. And beyond society, imagine war, catapults powered by compressed air, engines driving armored vehicles across battlefields, navies of steam-propelled warships dominating seas. Rome, already vast, might have extended its reach even further, its dominion cemented not by legions alone, but by machines unimaginable to its rivals. Yet the dangers are as striking as the wonders. The same engines that drive mills can drive weapons. Gunpowder, if discovered alongside steam, could have given rise to cannons in the ancient world. A Rome armed with both industrial power and explosive force might have crushed all opposition, ruling with an iron grip. Progress, too early, might have locked humanity into a harsher empire, one that endured not for centuries, but for millennia. Still, one cannot help but marvel at what might have been gained. Imagine the first-century Mediterranean, illuminated by electric light, powered by dynamos derived from experiments with magnetism. Imagine astronomy advanced not by naked eyes, but by telescopes crafted with machine-ground lenses. Imagine medicine not only with antiseptics, but with microscopes revealing the hidden world of disease. Each step of progress that took centuries in our history might have arrived in a single lifetime. Odd micro-story. In Hero's surviving texts, he describes a vending machine, yes, in antiquity, dispensing holy water when a coin was inserted. This device worked through levers and balance, a small wonder of automation. If such whimsical inventions were common enough to be written down, what other machines lay hidden in lost works? Automatic looms? Mechanical clocks? Engines whose designs never reached us? The ripple effects extend further still. With machines driving ships and workshops, trade would expand across oceans. Rome might have reached the Americas, not in the 15th century, but in the 1st. The Silk Road might have become not a caravan route, but a chain of steamships and locomotives. Globalization, the binding of continents into one network, might have arrived 2,000 years before it did. What philosophies would have emerged in such a world? Would democracy have flourished with free citizens unbound from toil, or would authoritarian empires have tightened their grip with mechanical might? Would humanity have reached the stars earlier, or destroyed itself with the weapons of an industrial age born too soon? This is the haunting speculation of the library's machines. Not only what was lost, but what might have been built. The Eolipile spinning in Hero's hands could have been the first engine of a new world. Instead, it became a curiosity, forgotten until the ashes of Alexandria were stirred centuries later. And so we stand again in the silence of history, imagining the hum of engines echoing in marble halls, the hiss of steam where only papyrus now lingers in memory. The machines of the ancients were possible. The library might have preserved them. But the world we know is one where they slipped away, leaving us to wonder, what if the Industrial Revolution had dawned in the age of Rome? Unroll a scroll in the dim light of Alexandria, and the world begins to change. Inked lines trace rivers and coastlines, mountains and harbors, the shape of a world half known. Some maps are careful, measured, the product of sailors and surveyors. Others are fantastical, blending rumor with observation, placing monsters in the sea and lands at the edge of imagination. Together they form more than cartography. They form a record of how humanity understood its place on the earth. If the Library of Alexandria had survived, perhaps the maps it preserved would tell us of continents discovered long before Columbus, of voyages forgotten, of worlds connected centuries before history records them. In our world, ancient geography advanced in fragments. Eratosthenes, himself the chief librarian of Alexandria, measured the circumference of the earth with remarkable accuracy in the 3rd century BCE. Using shadows and distances between cities, he concluded that the planet was vast, round, and measurable. Strabo compiled geographic works that mixed careful descriptions with travelers' tales. Ptolemy, centuries later, would produce maps that influenced explorers well into the Renaissance. But what if these texts had not been isolated moments? What if they had been preserved in continuity, built upon, and combined with accounts from sailors, merchants, and emissaries who ventured beyond the familiar seas? Trade already stretched further than many realize. Indian goods found their way to Roman markets. Chinese silk traveled westward along caravan routes. There are even tantalizing claims: Roman coins found in India, possible contact across the Red Sea and Indian Ocean, that suggests the Mediterranean and Asia were not strangers, but distant neighbors. If records of these exchanges were gathered in the library, they might have mapped the outlines of a connected world centuries before the Silk Road became famous. And then, the greater speculation: could maps of the Americas have existed within those halls? Odd fact, some medieval maps like the Vinland map hint at knowledge of North America before Columbus, though their authenticity remains debated. Legends of islands far to the west appear in Norse sagas and in Mediterranean lore. If sailors in antiquity were blown off course, if they glimpsed distant shores and returned with tales, those stories could have been written, copied, and stored in Alexandria. The library might have contained records of lands across the Atlantic, not as myth, but as tentative geography. A coastline sketched from rumor, a mention of fertile fields beyond endless seas. Just enough to spark curiosity, just enough to invite exploration. Consider what might have followed. With such maps, Rome, already a maritime power, might have sent expeditions westward. Steam engines were not necessary. The sturdy triremes and cargo vessels of antiquity were capable of crossing oceans with favorable winds. If navigators had been guided by scrolls suggesting lands across the Atlantic, the Americas might have been reached not in the 15th century, but in the 1st. The consequences are staggering. Maize, potatoes, tomatoes foods that reshaped global diets might have entered the Old World 2,000 years earlier. Horses, iron, and written language might have reached the Americas long before the arrival of Columbus, altering the course of entire civilizations. But geography is more than distant continents. Even within the Mediterranean world, lost maps might have transformed history. Imagine if detailed charts of African rivers, Indian ports, or the coasts of Arabia had survived. Exploration would not have waited for the age of discovery. Maritime empires might have risen in antiquity, their influence spreading along shores mapped with precision. Odd micro-story: the Antikythera mechanism, recovered from a Greek shipwreck, functioned as an ancient astronomical calculator. It could predict eclipses, contract celestial cycles. If such complexity existed in a single artifact, what might have been recorded in the library? Devices paired with charts, mathematics alongside maps. Navigation by stars could have become a precise science, guiding ships across oceans with confidence. And yet, with every possibility comes a question. Would earlier contact have led to mutual exchange, or to conquest and destruction? Would Roman legions have marched through the Americas, reshaping its civilizations long before they could flourish? Would the spread of disease, smallpox, measles have arrived centuries earlier, devastating populations before the world was ready for such contact? The library's maps might have opened the globe, but at what cost? Still, the vision persists. Imagine standing in a hall of scrolls, unrolling one after another, watching the known world expand with each line of ink. Rivers of Africa, coasts of India, perhaps even the distant outline of a continent across the Atlantic. A mosaic of geography, drawn not from centuries of rediscovery, but preserved in continuity. This is the map of the world that might have been a world where oceans were crossed sooner, where trade bound continents earlier, where the story of humanity was woven together not in fragments, but as one tapestry. The waves lap against Alexandria's harbor. Somewhere within those vanished shelves may have lain the key to a global age that never came. The library is gone, but the question lingers. What if the maps of the world had survived? Night falls over ancient Egypt. The harbor quiets, the torches burn low, and above the still waters of the Mediterranean spreads a sky unpolluted by modern lights. Constellations glitter, sharp and eternal. To the scholars of Alexandria, these were not just patterns of beauty, but a vast code waiting to be deciphered, a language written in stars. In the halls of the library, astronomy and mathematics were not separate pursuits, but intertwined disciplines. Papyrus scrolls recorded the heavens, calculating their rhythms, predicting their motions, and speculating on their meaning. What if all these records had survived? What visions of the cosmos might humanity have inherited long before Copernicus, Galileo, or Kepler? Among the lost voices was Aristarchus of Samos, a 3rd century BCE thinker whose radical claims set him apart. He proposed that the Earth revolved around the Sun, and not the other way around. In our world, his writings mostly perished, leaving only fragments and references in other texts. For nearly 1,800 years, heliocentrism would remain buried until Copernicus revived it. But imagine if Aristarchus's work had endured in Alexandria, copied and studied, debated by philosophers and mathematicians through the ages. The geocentric model might never have dominated Western thought. Galileo may not have been condemned for pointing his telescope skyward. Humanity might have entered the scientific age not in the 16th century, but in antiquity. Odd fact, the Babylonians had already charted the skies with remarkable precision, calculating planetary cycles and predicting eclipses. Their records, if gathered in the library, would have merged with Greek geometry and Egyptian calendrical systems. The result could have been an astronomical science centuries more advanced than what we inherited. Imagine Alexandrian scholars using Babylonian data, confirming Aristarchus's heliocentrism with mathematical rigor. Imagine the concept of gravity hinted at, orbital mechanics glimpsed, cosmic scale understood not in the Renaissance, but in the 1st centuries BCE. Mathematics was the indispensable key. Euclid, whose elements defined geometry, lived and taught in Alexandria. Archimedes, though based in Syracuse, exchanged ideas with Alexandrian scholars. Together, their works preserved and expanded could have advanced calculus, mechanics, and trigonometry far earlier. With such tools, astronomy could have leapt beyond observation into prediction, building models accurate enough to guide not only ships at sea, but dreams of reaching the heavens. The library may also have preserved great star catalogs. Hipparchus, working in the 2nd century BCE, is said to have charted hundreds of stars with remarkable accuracy. He compared his observations to earlier records, even detecting the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's axis. Much of his work is lost, surviving only in Ptolemy's later Almagest. But what if the full catalog had endured, along with the works of other unknown astronomers? Humanity might have tracked the stars with a precision that rivaled Renaissance instruments, centuries before telescopes existed. Calendars, too, might have been transformed. Ancient Egypt developed a solar calendar of 365 days, astonishingly close to the true year. The Maya, across the ocean, devised intricate calendars tied to astronomical cycles. If the library preserved records from multiple cultures, a synthesis might have emerged, an accurate reckoning of time guiding agriculture, navigation, and ritual. The leap year correction, stumbled upon in our history, could have been refined long before Julius Caesar's reform. Time itself might have flowed differently. Civilizations would not have drifted off course with inaccurate calendars, losing track of seasons and harvests. They would have lived in closer harmony with the rhythms of the cosmos. Odd micro story. In 1900, divers off the coast of Antikythera discovered a corroded bronze device gears mached in intricate precision. It turned out to be an ancient astronomical calculator, capable of predicting eclipses and planetary cycles. If such a machine was possible in the 2nd century BCE, what else might have been built? The library, preserving designs and diagrams, might have nurtured a lineage of scientific instruments, telescopes and orreries, centuries before their time. Speculation unfolds further. If heliocentrism had been accepted early, if orbital mechanics were refined, might humanity have dreamed of flight into space, not in the 20th century, but in the Middle Ages? Rockets, after all, were developed in China by the 13th century. If paired with Alexandrian mathematics and astronomy, the idea of reaching beyond Earth might not have been fantasy, but a long-term project of civilizations. Picture an alternate history where medieval scholars, equipped with star charts of dazzling precision, built observatories not to debate geocentrism, but to calculate trajectories. Where engineers, inspired by heroes' steam engines, constructed early machines for experimentation. Where the age of discovery reached not only across oceans, but upward into the sky. Yet as with all knowledge, danger walks beside wonder. An early grasp of celestial mechanics might have given rise to weapons based on the same principles projectiles launched with greater force. Engines designed for destruction as much as for exploration. The heavens inspire awe, but they also inspire conquest. Still, the possibility lingers, glowing like a star just beyond reach. The Library of Alexandria might have preserved not only maps of Earth, but maps of the cosmos guides to the planets, the rhythms of eclipses, even hints of distant worlds. In those lost scrolls, perhaps the question of other habitable planets was already asked. Perhaps humanity's dream of the stars is not new at all, but ancient, forgotten in the ash of burned papyrus. Imagine standing on the library's roof in the 2nd century BCE. The city sleeps, the harbor is quiet, and above you the constellations blaze. In one hand, you hold Aristarchus's heliocentric scroll. In the other, Hipparchus's star catalogue. With these, you glimpse a universe far larger, far stranger, far more magnificent than anyone around you can imagine. The sky above Alexandria was never silent. It spoke through mathematics, through observation, through daring speculation. If only its voice had survived, humanity might have lifted its gaze earlier, stretched its reach sooner, and walked among the stars, not in the modern age, but in the ancient. And so we return to the silence left by fire. The heavens still blaze above us, but the scrolls that might have explained them are gone. All that remains is the question that echoes across centuries. What if the sky above Alexandria had never been forgotten? Not all scrolls in the Library of Alexandria would have been devoted to medicine, philosophy, or astronomy. Some, more obscure, would have carried the scent of mystery. They belonged to a twilight realm between science and magic, curiosity and superstition. Today, we call them pseudoscience or myth. But what if, hidden within their cryptic lines, were glimpses of truths not yet understood strange sciences, waiting for rediscovery? Take alchemy, for example. In our history, alchemy is remembered as a failed attempt to transmute base metals into gold. But behind the quest for transformation lay real experimentation, the study of substances, reactions, and purification. Alchemists created distillation devices, explored acids, and cataloged minerals. If Alexandria preserved the earliest alchemical treatises, then perhaps chemistry itself would have been born not in the 17th century, but in the ancient world. Imagine Egyptian papyri describing the refinement of ores, or Babylonian texts recording methods of alloying. Scrolls might have contained formulas for dyes, perfumes, or medicinal tinctures, practical chemistry disguised in the cloak of mysticism. What we call alchemy might have been a seed hidden within the library that could have flowered into modern chemistry 2,000 years early. Odd fact, some ancient recipes survive. The so-called Greek fire, a mysterious incendiary weapon, could burn even on water. Its formula was a closely guarded secret, lost after the Byzantine era. If such military technologies were recorded in Alexandria, the balance of power in antiquity might have shifted dramatically. The library may also have housed accounts of mechanical wonders. Hero of Alexandria, whose surviving works astonish us with their ingenuity, described automata-moving statues powered by water, air, or weights. Temples featured doors that opened by themselves, theatrical devices where birds sang and figures moved. These were not toys, but the beginnings of robotics. What if the library preserved not only heroes' works, but those of other forgotten inventors? Imagine a lineage of mechanical knowledge, gears perfected, hydraulics refined, automata expanded. The concept of machines imitating life, what we call robotics today, might have taken root in antiquity, influencing religion, art, and daily labor. Another realm of strange science was cryptography, the art of hidden writing. The Greeks already used substitution ciphers, while Julius Caesar employed a simple shift code. If scrolls in Alexandria preserved more elaborate systems perhaps inspired by Egyptian hieroglyphs or Mesopotamian number puzzles, then the science of secrecy might have advanced long before the modern era. Secure communication could have transformed diplomacy and warfare, creating networks of encrypted messages spanning the ancient world. Odd microstory: ancient texts mention the magic of self-moving carts, of perpetual lamps said to burn without fuel, of mirrors that revealed secrets. Most historians dismiss these as exaggerations or allegories. But if the library had stored the details, diagrams, instructions, prototypes, some of these myths might have revealed themselves as genuine technologies, misunderstood through the lens of later ignorance. There is also the possibility of biological curiosities. The ancients knew of fermentation, yeast, and herbal remedies. What if some scrolls recorded experiments with molds or fungi that hinted at antibiotic properties? What if notes on crop cultivation, hybridization, or selective breeding offered insights into genetics long before Mendel? To us, these ideas sound modern. But to Alexandrian scholars, steeped in both observation and speculation, they may have been possibilities already under consideration. The strange sciences blur the line between reality and imagination. They are filled with riddles, half-truths, and sparks of brilliance hidden in metaphor. And yet, history shows us that many discoveries dismissed as fantasy eventually prove real. Lightning was once the weapon of gods until it became electricity. Stones falling from the sky were ridiculed until meteorites were accepted. Perhaps the library held texts just as strange to us, waiting to be believed. Imagine wandering its shelves and finding a scroll describing machines that breathe like animals, or metals that flow like water when struck with heat. Imagine discovering diagrams of mirrored devices that concentrate light so intensely they ignite wood, an idea attributed to Archimedes. Imagine cryptic notes about powders that explode when touched by flame, hinting at the chemistry of gunpowder centuries before its invention in China. But alongside wonder lies danger. The strange sciences might have accelerated progress or unleashed catastrophe. Gunpowder in the hands of Rome could have created empires of fire. Advanced cryptography could have made tyrannies more enduring. Automata might have displaced laborers, reshaping economies before societies could adapt. The library's role was not only to preserve knowledge, but to guard it. Within its walls, the boundary between enlightenment and peril was thin. And so, when we speak of the strange sciences, we stand at the edge of speculation. Were they nonsense, destined to fade? Or were they early steps toward truths we would not rediscover for centuries? The fire has taken the answer. We are left only with fragments, tantalizing hints, and myths that refuse to die. The library may have been more than a storehouse of rational thought. It may have been a sanctuary for the uncanny, the wondrous, the dangerous, the strange sciences of humanity's forgotten past. History, as we know it, unfolded slowly, centuries of repetition, of fragile empires rising and falling, of progress gained and lost. But beneath that long rhythm lies another possibility, a shadowed timeline that never came to pass. In that alternate world, Rome did not stop with aqueducts and stone roads. It embraced steam, mechanics, and invention, not as curiosities, but as engines of transformation. What if the Industrial Revolution had dawned not in the 18th century, but in the first? What if Rome, guided by the preserved knowledge of the Library of Alexandria, had built the future long before the Middle Ages began? Imagine it. Hero of Alexandria's Eolipile, no longer dismissed as a temple toy, but studied, refined, and applied. The simple spinning globe becomes the seed of steam-driven engines. Workshops in Roman cities echo not with the sound of hammers alone, but with the hiss and roar of pistons. Mills grind grain without human toil. Saws cut timber with mechanical speed. Mines are drained not by exhausted slaves, but by pumps powered by vapor. The legions march with a new advantage. Engines mounted on wheeled carts, hauling supplies across the empire. On the seas, triremes give way to steam-driven warships, free from the mercy of wind and oar. Rome's reach, already vast, becomes unstoppable. Odd fact, the Romans already experimented with concrete strong enough to build harbors that still stand today. They built cranes capable of lifting tons of stone, aqueducts stretching for hundreds of miles, and road systems unmatched for a millennium. All they lacked was motive power. With steam, that missing piece would have been filled. Now extend the speculation. Once engines emerge, innovation tends to accelerate. In our world, the time from the first steam pumps to the first railways was scarcely over a century. If Rome had begun in the 1st century CE, what might the 5th have looked like? Picture iron rails stretching across Europe, steam locomotives pulling freight and passengers at speeds no horse could rival. Picture airships of stitched linen and bronze frames rising above the Colosseum, drifting across the empire. Picture experimental gliders launched from Roman cliffs, their pilots studying the art of flight centuries before Da Vinci sketched his famous wings. And then an even bolder leap, picture airplanes, not in the 20th century, but in the 5th. Crude by our standards, perhaps, but capable of crossing seas, of carrying messages and armies through the air. The Roman eagle, emblazoned not only on banners, but on wings. The consequences are staggering. With flight, with steam, with engines of war, Rome might have endured not for centuries, but for millennia. The Middle Ages, with its feudal lords and fragmented kingdoms, might never have come. Instead, humanity might have entered a continuous age of empire, global in scope, mechanical in power. But there is another possibility: progress too rapid, overwhelming the societies that bore it. The Industrial Revolution strained the 18th century with pollution, inequality, and upheaval. How much more fragile would antiquity have been, confronted with machines that displaced slaves, transformed labor, and demanded resources on a massive scale? Perhaps Rome would have burned out even faster. Factories belching smoke into cities without sanitation, forests stripped to fuel engines, mines dug deeper, slaves replaced by machines, but inequality still entrenched. The empire, overextended and poisoned by its own ambition, could have collapsed in fire not from barbarian invasions, but from internal exhaustion. Odd microstory: the Chinese, by the 3rd century, had already experimented with kites, gliders, and even rudimentary hot air balloons. If such knowledge had crossed into Alexandria and been preserved, paired with Roman engineering and Alexandrian science, aviation might have arisen as a synthesis of East and West. A 5th century world with both locomotives and flying machines is not unthinkable. Consider, too, the ripple effects on thought. A Rome with machines might have nurtured science as a respected discipline, not a fragile pursuit, often overshadowed by philosophy or religion. With telescopes, microscopes, and precise instruments, the natural sciences could have advanced centuries early. Newton's laws might have been formulated in the age of Augustus. Darwin's theories might have been whispered in marble courtyards centuries before the voyage of the Beagle. And if so, the leap to electricity, magnetism, and engines more advanced than steam might not have waited until the modern age. The ancients could have glimpsed the outlines of a digital world, a communication network not of parchment and couriers, but of signals and sparks. Yet with each vision comes a haunting counterpoint. Weapons, too, would have advanced. Steam-driven war machines, ironclad ships, explosives, even chemical weapons derived from early chemistry, all might have arrived in antiquity. Instead of a long medieval pause, humanity might have endured cycles of industrial warfare, empires clashing with weapons, capable of destruction on a scale unimaginable for their time. Would this alternate world have led us to space by the Middle Ages, or destroy us before the Renaissance could dawn? Picture for a moment the city of Rome as it might have been. Not only aqueducts arching across valleys, but railways threading between marble pillars. Not only torches lighting the forum, but great lamps fed by chemical fuel. Not only gladiators in the Colosseum, but experimental aircraft circling overhead, watched by tens of thousands. A world familiar in outline, yet utterly alien in detail. This is the future that never came. A future glimpsed in fragments of invention, hinted at in the scrolls of Alexandria, but extinguished before it could ignite. And so we return to silence, to ruins and ash. The library's destruction left us with centuries of delay, centuries of lost opportunity. We can only imagine the machines that might have risen, the engines that might have roared, the wings that might have flown. The question lingers, tantalizing and unanswerable. What if the future had come long before its time? Empires rise not only on the strength of armies, but on the foundation of knowledge. Roads and weapons carry soldiers, but ideas sustain civilizations. In the ashes of the Great Library of Alexandria, it is not only lost discoveries we mourn, but the paths of empire that might have been rewritten. For had those scrolls survived, a map of human history, its borders, its dominions, its balances of power could have looked profoundly different. Rome, in particular, stands as the great fulcrum of this speculation. The empire stretched across continents, binding diverse peoples under its banners. Yet even at its height, Rome was fragile, dependent on the muscle of slaves, the grain of Egypt, and the will of its emperors. What if Rome had possessed more than engineering brilliance? What if it had inherited the distilled knowledge of centuries gathered in Alexandria mechanics, medicine, astronomy, statcraft amplified and preserved in continuity? The empire's decline might never have come. Instead of fragmenting into feudal kingdoms, Rome might have stabilized, its institutions reformed by ideas of governance preserved from Greece, Persia, and beyond. Imagine Roman senates drawing on ancient Indian treatises on politics, like the Arthashastra, or Chinese texts on centralized administration. Bureaucracy might have been refined into something far more enduring than what actually survived the collapse. Odd fact, the Romans had encountered Chinese silk through indirect trade, yet direct contact between Rome and Han China was rare and fleeting. If the library had preserved detailed accounts of the Silk Road, of Chinese technology, or even of emissaries' encounters, the two great empires might have established permanent ties. The result could have been a transcontinental alliance, stretching from the Mediterranean to the Yellow River. Persia, too, would have stood transformed. As the crossroads of East and West, the Persian empires had long valued knowledge, building observatories, libraries, and schools. With access to Alexandrian archives, Persia might have fused Greek geometry with Babylonian astronomy, Egyptian medicine with Indian mathematics. Instead of rising and falling beneath the shadow of Rome and later Islam, Persia might have become the intellectual and scientific center of the ancient world, a hub where empires sought wisdom and innovation. Consider the potential. Early adoption of decimal systems, advanced optics, or preserved treatises on anatomy. Persian scholars, centuries before the Islamic Golden Age, might have pioneered technologies and sciences that would alter not just their empire, but the entire trajectory of Eurasian civilization. And then, to the east, lies China. Already, the Han Dynasty had developed technologies far beyond much of the ancient world. Paper, seismographs, sophisticated metallurgy, even rudimentary compasses. If the Library of Alexandria had preserved detailed accounts of these. Rome and Persia might have accelerated their own sciences by borrowing and adapting Chinese innovations. In turn, Chinese scholars, learning of Greek astronomy or Egyptian medicine, might have pursued entirely new syntheses. The result? A web of exchange centuries earlier than the Silk Road's full flowering, a world where empires were not isolated, but bound by shared knowledge. Each leap forward echoed across continents. Odd micro-story. Chinese records speak of distant Da-Qin, a realm most historians believe referred to Rome. These fragments hint at curiosity, at a recognition of another great power across the world. If Alexandria had preserved fuller accounts, perhaps even maps, China might have launched fleets westward long before the Ming voyages of Zheng He. A maritime bridge between East and West could have spanned centuries earlier. The geopolitics of such a world are staggering to imagine. Rome, fortified by knowledge, does not fall in the 5th century, but evolves, adapting with reforms. Persia, rich in science, becomes a rival not only in arms, but in innovation. China, connected to both, fuels the exchange with inventions and philosophies. Instead of fragmented ages of darkness and rediscovery, humanity might have lived in an age of continuous empire, vast and interconnected. But such unity might not have meant peace. Knowledge amplifies ambition as much as wisdom. A Rome armed with advanced engineering might have sought total domination. A Persia with powerful sciences might have resisted fiercely. A China enriched by global trade might have pursued hegemony beyond Asia. The scrolls of Alexandria might have created not a harmony of empires, but a clash of superpowers centuries before the modern era. Odd fact, even in our fragmented history, echoes of this lost potential survived. Islamic scholars in Baghdad's House of Wisdom translated Greek, Persian, and Indian texts, preserving knowledge that Europe had forgotten. Fragments of Alexandrian lore trickled through, igniting the Renaissance centuries later. Imagine if that spark had been a flame from the beginning. No trickle, but a flood. There is also the deeper question: how might empire itself have changed under the influence of knowledge? Perhaps centralized rule would have given way to more complex systems of representation if political theories preserved in Alexandria had been applied. Perhaps empires would have invested more in education, literacy, and communication, recognizing that control of minds is as vital as control of armies. Perhaps slavery, undermined by machines, would have ended earlier, reshaping the social order. The survival of scrolls might not only have extended Rome's dominion or Persia's brilliance, it might have redefined what empire meant: less conquest, more governance, less brute force, more enlightened rule. Or it might have accelerated the darker aspects of empire: total control, surveillance, and exploitation perfected by knowledge. And so we stand at the crossroads of speculation. The library's lost scrolls could have granted Rome endurance, Persia preeminence, China connection. They might have created a world of balance or a world of domination. A world where empires traded in wisdom as much as in goods, or a world where superpowers clashed with knowledge as their sharpest weapon. Picture the great map of antiquity. In one version, it is fractured, dotted with rising and falling states, drifting through centuries of silence. In another, the one hidden in the library's ash, it is seamless. A vast network of empires bound by knowledge, their power not broken but magnified. This is the empire that never came to be. A world where Alexandria's scrolls did not burn, but spoke, and in speaking, reshaped the destiny of nations. In the silence of the library's ashes, it is not only science and empire that haunt us. There are also the voices, whispered, lyrical, questioning, that we will never hear again. Plays once performed before candlelight, poems spoken to the rhythm of lyres, philosophies debated in shaded courtyards. All of them, perhaps, written, copied, and shelved within those vanished halls. All of them now gone. The ancients knew the power of the word. A single poem could move armies. A single philosophy could reshape nations. But papyrus is fragile, more delicate than memory, more fleeting than stone. When the library fell, it was not only knowledge that perished, but the soul of civilizations expressed through art. What if entire schools of thought disappeared in those flames? What if whole genres of poetry, unknown to us, once flourished, only to vanish without a trace? Consider Greek tragedy. Today, we know Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides. Yet records suggest that over 100 playwrights wrote for the great festivals, their works numbering in the thousands. Fewer than 40 complete plays survive. The rest may have sat in Alexandria, waiting to be read again. Perhaps voices more daring, more experimental, more radical than those we know existed, lost dramatists who pushed the boundaries of myth, politics, and human suffering. Imagine a tragedian who questioned the gods more fiercely than Euripides, or a comic poet who rivaled Aristophanes in satire. Their words might have challenged empires, reshaped art, or inspired revolutions centuries before their time. Philosophy, too, stands as a fragment of what once was. We read Plato and Aristotle, yet they were not the only thinkers of their age. Entire schools, Cynics, Cyrenaics, Megarians have left us only fragments, scraps quoted by others. If their full works lay once in Alexandria, what new ethical systems, political visions, or cosmic theories have we lost? Odd fact, Diogenes the Cynic, remembered mostly for his eccentricities, may have written extensively. Imagine scrolls in Alexandria containing his treatises, offering sharp critiques of power and wealth ideas that could have influenced politics in ways we cannot guess. And then there is poetry, the most fragile voice of all. Sappho, whose fragments survive like broken seashells on the shore of time, may have been fully preserved in Alexandria. Entire volumes of her lyric poems, complete and radiant, perhaps lay upon those shelves. If they had endured, she might stand today as equal to Homer, shaping not just fragments of literary history, but its entire foundation. How many poets, known only by name Anacreon, Corinna, Bacchylides might have sung in full, their verses alive across the centuries? Their absence leaves us not only with silence, but with the shape of an absence, a reminder of how incomplete our inheritance truly is. The library's loss also silenced voices from beyond Greece and Rome. Egyptian hymns to forgotten gods, Babylonian epics we have never read, Indian philosophical dialogues, Chinese poetry, perhaps even oral traditions written down from Africa or beyond. The world's diversity of voices, gathered and preserved, may have filled those halls. Their disappearance narrows our understanding of humanity, leaving us to believe that what survived was all that existed. Odd micro-story? The Epic of Gilgamesh, the world's oldest surviving tale, was only rediscovered in the 19th century, buried in cuneiform tablets. For centuries, it lay unknown. How many epics equal to it, perhaps greater than it, perished in Alexandria, never to be unearthed? But perhaps the most haunting loss is not of individual works, but of conversations that never happened. Imagine philosophers of Greece in dialogue with Indian thinkers, their texts preserved side by side. Imagine Chinese poets inspiring Roman writers, their verses translated and compared. The library could have been the stage for a global chorus of voices, singing not in isolation, but in harmony. That chorus is silent now, and yet silence has its own resonance. The absence of these voices reminds us of fragility, of how much of human thought depends on chance survival. A scrap quoted by another author, a manuscript hidden in a monastery, a line preserved on pottery. These are the accidents that decide what survives and what does not. The library's loss reminds us that what we call the canon is merely what survived the flames. So we listen to the silence, to the missing plays, the vanished poems, the unwritten philosophies. They hover at the edge of imagination, tantalizing, unreachable. The lost voices remind us that history is not complete, that our understanding is partial, that behind the stories we know are echoes of stories forever beyond our reach. The Library of Alexandria was not only a treasure of knowledge, it was a chorus of human voices, silenced. And though we cannot hear them, we can still feel their absence, as one feels the hollow in a ruin where once a pillar stood. Beneath the weight of history, beneath the rational order of scrolls and catalogs, there lingers another possibility, one that belongs more to myth than to fact, yet refuses to fade. What if the Great Library of Alexandria did not only house the works of known civilizations, but also preserved memories of worlds long vanished? Civilizations whispered in legend, Atlantis, Lemuria, and others whose names had dissolved into speculation. Could it be that the library was not only a storehouse of knowledge, but a vault of secrets holding testimony of ages far older than Greece or Egypt, recording echoes of civilizations we no longer believe existed? Plato's account of Atlantis remains one of history's most tantalizing mysteries. Written in the 4th century BCE, his dialogues describe a vast island empire beyond the Pillars of Hercules, destroyed in a single day and night of catastrophe. For centuries, scholars had debated whether Atlantis was allegory, history, or something between. But imagine if, within the library's halls, there were scrolls corroborating his story records from Egyptian priests who first told the tale, maps of lost islands, or chronicles of a drowned world. Odd fact, Herodotus, the so-called father of history, once spoke of lands far beyond the known world, their details now considered fanciful. If Alexandria preserved more of his sources, we might find hints not of myth, but of places erased by time, waiting for rediscovery. Beyond Atlantis lies another phantom, Lemuria. 19th century scholars coined the name to explain the presence of similar species across India and Madagascar, but the idea soon took on mythic life. Writers claimed it was a vast continent in the Indian Ocean, home to advanced peoples who perished in cataclysm. If scrolls in Alexandria had preserved ancient accounts of vanished southern lands, the story might have had roots far deeper than Victorian speculation. And then there are still other whispers. Hyperborea, the land beyond the north wind. Mu, a Pacific continent said to have fallen beneath the waves. Myths scattered across the globe, each describing a people advanced and powerful, each destroyed in disaster. Could the library have contained the connective tissue between them? A record of real civilizations erased by rising seas or shifting earth? Consider the evidence of cataclysm. Around 12,000 years ago, at the end of the Ice Age, sea levels rose dramatically. Entire coastlines vanished beneath the waves. Today, off the shores of India, Japan, and the Mediterranean, ruins lie submerged, their origins uncertain. Were these remnants known to the ancients? Did they preserve their memory in scrolls we have since lost? If so, the Library of Alexandria might once have held maps of coastlines now underwater or histories of cities long gone. It may even have preserved records of civilizations older than Sumer or Egypt cultures, erased not by time alone, but by disaster. Odd micro-story? In Egypt, priests told Solon, the Athenian statesman, that their own records stretched back thousands of years further than Greek memory allowed. These claims seemed unbelievable, yet fragments of Egyptian chronology suggest dynasties and histories longer than once assumed. If such records were gathered in Alexandria, they might have revealed timelines of humanity far deeper than we accept. Now imagine what that knowledge could have done. If Rome, Persia, or later empires had inherited accounts of lost civilizations, their sense of history would have shifted. Instead of seeing themselves as the pinnacle, they would have understood themselves as inheritors, just one turn in a much older cycle. Perhaps this awareness would have humbled empires, or perhaps it would have inspired them to seek the technologies and powers of the ancients, determined to reclaim what was lost. Speculation deepens further. Could the library have held not only myths, but actual technologies from forgotten civilizations? Some claim that megalithic structures like the pyramids, Stonehenge, or the statues of Easter Island represent knowledge beyond the capacity of their times. If instructions, diagrams, or records of techniques were preserved, they might have offered confirmation of a lost lineage of advanced builders. Imagine scrolls describing machines for lifting stones weighing hundreds of tons, or methods of precise astronomical alignment without telescopes. Imagine treatises explaining how ancient peoples harnessed natural forces in ways we no longer understand. Such knowledge, if preserved, might have bridged the gulf between myth and science, revealing Atlantis not as fantasy, but as history. Odd fact: in many cultures, myths of a great flood persist. From Mesopotamia's Epic of Gilgamesh, to biblical accounts, to oral traditions in the Americas and Oceania, the story repeats civilizations swept away by water. Could the library have preserved the common source of these tales? A record of real disasters, preserved across continents, proof of a global memory we now dismiss as myth? The danger of such knowledge is also worth pondering. If Rome had possessed records of Atlantis and its downfall, it might have sought to emulate its power, ignoring the lessons of its fall. If knowledge of lost technologies was recovered, it might have been weaponized, unleashing devastation in pursuit of empire. And yet, even with such risks, the allure remains. To imagine that Alexandria's shells once contained voices from civilizations erased from time is to imagine that humanity's story is not a straight line, but a cycle of rise and ruin, memory and forgetting. The library's loss thus becomes more than the destruction of knowledge. It becomes the silencing of civilizations themselves. Picture wandering its halls and finding a scroll written in a script no scholar can decipher, describing a land now buried beneath the Atlantic. Picture opening another, its diagrams showing machines unknown to Rome or Egypt, their purpose mysterious. Picture a shelf filled with chronicles of floods, fires, and quakes that ended worlds older than ours. The Great Library, in this vision, becomes not only the memory of known history, but the ark of lost ages, a bridge to Atlantis, Lemuria, Hyperborea, and other shadows on the horizon of human imagination. Today, we are left only with fragments myths dismissed as allegory, ruins whose origins remain debated, coincidences that may or may not reveal deeper truths. But the possibility lingers, like the echo of a forgotten song, that once, in Alexandria, these mysteries were not speculation, but knowledge written in ink upon papyrus. And if so, then the destruction of the library did not merely erase science and poetry. It erased entire civilizations, leaving us to rediscover them only in legend. The echoes of Atlantis remind us that history may be far older, far stranger, and far more fragile than we believe. They remind us that myth itself may be the smoke of a forgotten fire, a memory distorted but not extinguished. And they remind us that, in the ruins of Alexandria, more than knowledge was lost, an entire lineage of human voices, drowned by time. Long before Alexandria rose, long before Ptolemaic kings built their library, the Nile had already carried wisdom through the centuries. Egypt was old when Greece was young. Its monuments of stone, its hieroglyphs carved into temple walls, its sacred rituals and cosmic calendars, all spoke of a civilization that measured time not in centuries, but in millennia. What knowledge, then, did Egypt contribute to the Great Library? And what older memory might have flowed from the Nile into its scroll-lined halls? Egyptian medicine was renowned across the ancient world. Papyrus texts like the Ebers Papyrus and the Edwin Smith Papyrus, some of which survive today, reveal a system astonishingly advanced. Prescriptions for hundreds of ailments, surgical techniques, even descriptions of the brain. The Egyptians used honey as an antiseptic, moldy bread to prevent infection remedies whose logic modern science would only confirm thousands of years later. If the Great Library had preserved the full breadth of Egyptian medical texts, humanity might have possessed centuries of accumulated healing knowledge. Rome might have wielded antiseptics long before the age of antibiotics. Surgeons might have operated with precision unknown until the Renaissance. Epidemics that scarred history might have been lessened, even prevented. Architecture, too, was part of the Nile's wisdom. The pyramids, temples, and obelisks stand as silent teachers. Even today, their construction remains partly mysterious. The precision of stone blocks, the alignments to the stars, the sheer scale of labor Egyptian architecture reveals knowledge of mathematics, geometry, and engineering beyond what most civilizations of the time could achieve. What if the library preserved detailed blueprints, construction manuals, and treatises on stone-cutting techniques? What if instructions for moving 100-ton blocks or aligning monuments with celestial cycles lay on its shelves? Such texts could have given future builders tools to reshape cities, even civilizations, in ways we can scarcely imagine. And then there is astronomy. The Egyptians were not merely sky watchers. They were sky keepers. They tracked the rising of Sirius, predicting the floods of the Nile with uncanny accuracy. Their calendars guided agriculture, ritual, and empire itself. Temples aligned with solstices and equinoxes, pyramids aligned with constellations. Imagine scrolls in the library containing Egyptian star maps, records of the heavens stretching back centuries, perhaps even millennia. Imagine astronomical tables showing the precession of the equinoxes, the slow shifting of the heavens, knowledge rediscovered only in modern times. Could it be that Egyptian astronomers preserved a memory of the skies reaching into the Ice Age when constellations stood in different positions? Odd fact, the Great Sphinx of Giza, eroded by weather in ways some argue suggest extreme antiquity, may date to periods older than orthodox timelines allow. If Alexandrian scribes gathered Egypt's deepest temple records, the library might have preserved accounts of monuments built before the pharaohs, a continuity of memory reaching into forgotten epochs. The Nile also carried myth, which often veils history in its folds. Tales of gods who reigned before men, of floods that reshaped the world, of golden ages and catastrophic falls. To the Egyptian priesthood, myth was not fiction, but coded truth layers of meaning accessible to the initiated. The library might have contained their secret commentaries, their hidden histories, explaining what these myths once meant. What if these records revealed that Egypt's wisdom reached back not only to its dynasties, but to civilizations before the flood? What if papyrus scrolls preserved Ice Age memories, accounts of cities drowned by rising seas, of knowledge carried forward by survivors who built the first temples along the Nile? Odd micro-story. Ancient Egyptian king lists, like the Turin Papyrus, mention reigns of semi-divine beings stretching back thousands of years before known history. These figures are often dismissed as myth. But if the library had preserved the full king lists, perhaps in detail, would we have a clearer window into humanity's shadowed prehistory? Consider how different our world would be if these Egyptian records had endured. Architecture, medicine, and astronomy might have leapt forward. Histories of lost ages might have reframed our entire sense of time. The Renaissance might have been unnecessary. Humanity might have lived in continuous knowledge rather than rediscovery. And beyond practicality, there is something more profound: philosophy of the Nile. Egyptian texts reveal a worldview centered on Nayat, order, balance, harmony. They saw the cosmos itself as a reflection of this principle. If such wisdom had been preserved and studied, it might have shaped not only technology, but ethics. Empires might have risen not solely on conquest, but on cosmic balance, guided by philosophies older than Greece or Rome. Yet, like the Nile's waters, this wisdom slipped through our grasp. The library burned, papyrus turned to ash, and millennia of memory dissolved. We are left with fragments, a few surviving papyri, inscriptions on stone, alignments of temples. Enough to remind us of the depth once present, but not enough to reveal the full picture. Picture, then, the shelves of the library filled with Egyptian texts, manuals of medicine detailing cures now reinvented, blueprints of temples whose methods are still debated, astronomical charts showing skies not as they are, but as they were in epochs before memory, a continuity of human history stretching not back 5,000 years, but 10, perhaps even 12, a bridge across the abyss of prehistory. The wisdom of the Nile was more than knowledge. It was memory. And when the library perished, that memory may have perished with it, leaving us stranded in the present, severed from our deepest past. Time is not an even flame. It burns selectively, consuming some things, sparing others. Stone endures. Papyrus crumbles. What survives to shape the present is not necessarily what was most valuable, but what proved most resistant. The pyramids stand across millennia, their angled faces still casting shadows at sunset. But the words of those who built them, what they thought, what they dreamed, have mostly vanished, dissolved into dust. The destruction of the Great Library of Alexandria is a tragedy, but it also reflects a larger truth. Knowledge itself is fragile. A single ember can consume 1,000 voices. A single accident can silence an entire lineage of thought. And sometimes, survival is nothing more than chance. Consider the scroll. Papyrus, though ingenious, is delicate. Its fibers weaken with moisture. Its ink fades with light. Even when carefully preserved, centuries are its limit. Without constant copying, the words vanish. Contrast this with stone. Carve a truth into granite, and it may remain long after language itself has changed. The pyramids endure not because they were meant to hold wisdom, but because they were made of stone. The library perished because it was made of reeds. Odd micro story. The Codex Bezae, one of the oldest copies of the New Testament, survived not because it was guarded, but because it was forgotten in a monastic library. Dust and neglect preserved it where care might have destroyed it. So many of the texts we prize today survived not by intention, but by accident. Another, the poems of Catullus, the Roman poet, nearly disappeared. For centuries they were unknown, until a single manuscript was discovered in Verona during the Middle Ages. All we know of Catullus, all his passion and wit, comes from that single chance survival. Without it, he would be nothing more than a name in another author's margin. The Library of Alexandria might have held hundreds of such authors, their works copied and preserved. But fire knows nothing of value. The papyrus burned, and with it, the voices that did not happen to be duplicated elsewhere. For every Homer who survived through repeated transcription, there may have been a dozen equally gifted poets who left no trace. Knowledge burns faster than stone crumbles. When we look at the ruins of antiquity, we see temples, palaces, fortresses, but rarely the thoughts that filled them. History's imbalance is stark. Architecture stands mute while literature, philosophy, and science vanish. The monuments remain, but the minds that built them are silent. Odd fact, the only reason we possess as much of Aristotle's works as we do is because they were rediscovered in a dusty cellar in Asia Minor centuries after his death. Before that, his writings nearly vanished. Even now, scholars believe we have only a portion of what he wrote. Imagine what else might have been lost forever when the library burned. And yet, this fragility carries a strange beauty. It reminds us that every surviving manuscript, every fragment, is a miracle. The Epic of Gilgamesh came to us only because clay tablets were buried under desert sands for millennia. The poems of Sappho reach us in scattered fragments quoted by others, like sparks carried by the wind. Knowledge survives not because it is indestructible, but because chance allows it to slip through the cracks of time. The library's loss thus forces us to confront a paradox. Humanity has built great monuments to permanence, the pyramids, the Parthenon, the Great Wall. But our truest monuments are words, ideas, and discoveries. These are what give meaning to stone. Yet they are the most fragile of all. A pyramid can last 5,000 years. A scroll, barely 500. Unless recopied, unless cared for, it vanishes, leaving behind only mute stone, unilluminated by the voices that once animated it. Imagine standing amid the ruins of Alexandria's library, its columns blackened, its shelves empty. The building itself may have survived in some form for centuries, but the scrolls, delicate as dry leaves, would not. Fire was enough. Neglect was enough. Even damp air would have been enough. And so the greatest collection of human thought became ash. This is the burning of time, the relentless consumption of what is fragile, the slow but certain erosion of memory. The pyramids defy it, the papyrus succumbs to it, and we, centuries later, inherit only what chance preserved. Odd micro-story, a single text by Archimedes, containing ideas of calculus centuries ahead of Newton, survived only because a monk scraped the parchment clean and reused it for prayer. The original words lingered beneath, faint but recoverable. That palimpsest, discovered in the modern age, gave us a glimpse of brilliance almost lost. How many more Archimedes waited in Alexandria's ash, never to be seen again? The library's destruction was not unique. Other collections fell: Baghdad's House of Wisdom, China's burned Confucian classics. Again and again, knowledge proves fragile, subject to the whims of power and accident. Each time, memory narrows. Each time, we must rebuild from fragments. And yet, there is endurance too. Each fragment that survives reminds us of resilience. Each rediscovered manuscript, each unearthed tablet is a spark against the dark. The burning of time may consume much, but it cannot consume everything. So we stand between permanence and fragility. The pyramids cast their shadows still, mute but enduring. The scrolls are gone, but in their absence, they teach us something profound, that memory is fragile, that knowledge must be guarded, and that what we call history is only what time allowed us to keep. In the silence of lost voices, in the survival of stone, we glimpse the paradox of human legacy. Time burns, but sometimes, just sometimes, the flame leaves embers. History, as we know it, is but one version of events, a single thread woven through countless possibilities. It feels inevitable because it is the one we inherited. Yet, when we imagine the Great Library of Alexandria intact, we glimpse other timelines, parallel histories that might have unfolded if its scrolls had survived the centuries. In those shelves lay not only memory, but momentum. Knowledge, once preserved, pushes forward. It alters choices, accelerates inventions, reshapes empires. To imagine the library alive is to imagine a world diverging at countless forks. Some paths lead to wonders, others to ruins. One path envisions humanity centuries ahead. Imagine Rome armed not only with legions, but with steam engines, drawn from Hero of Alexandria's forgotten devices. By the 1st century CE, aqueducts might have powered turbines, ships might have moved without sails, and factories might have lined the Tiber. The Industrial Revolution could have arrived not in the 18th century, but in the ancient world. What would follow? Perhaps medieval Europe would never fall into its long silence. Perhaps electricity would hum across continents by the 10th century. By the year 1500, perhaps telescopes would already be peering at exoplanets or rockets piercing the sky. Humanity might stand among the stars, not in the 20th century, but 1,000 years earlier. Another path, however, is darker. Knowledge, once unleashed, cannot always be controlled. If the library contained not only science, but weapons recipes for poisons, texts on siege engines, or even principles that could be twisted into destructive power, then empires might have collapsed under the weight of their own ambition. Rome, with advanced war machines, might have conquered faster, but also overreached faster. Civilizations might have risen higher, only to fall harder, plunging the world into ruin centuries earlier. Odd fact? Greek fire, a Byzantine weapon whose formula remains mysterious, terrified enemies for centuries. If Alexandria preserved such secrets, or worse, improved upon them, entire wars might have burned hotter and ended more violently. In this timeline, the library's survival could have accelerated destruction, not progress. There is also a subtler path. The library might not have transformed the world overnight, but through quiet accumulation. Scrolls on medicine, agriculture, and governance could have improved lives gradually, extending lifespans, feeding more people, stabilizing empires. The Renaissance might not have been a rebirth, but a continuous flowering. Instead of rediscovering Greek and Roman wisdom, humanity might have lived within it unbroken. Imagine a world without the so-called Dark Ages. Imagine cathedrals built not only as monuments of faith, but as observatories aligned with precise astronomical tables. Imagine monks copying not scraps of Aristotle, but entire libraries of him, and beyond him, thinkers we have never known. Progress would not have been a leap forward after centuries of silence, but a steady climb across generations. Odd micro story. In China, the invention of gunpowder reshaped history. Yet if text describing its formula had reached Europe centuries earlier through Alexandria's collections, the balance of power might have shifted. Medieval battles could have been fought with cannons long before they were. Or consider the compass. Preserved knowledge of navigation might have opened oceans to trade and conquest centuries before Columbus. Each fragment of knowledge accelerates history in ways profound and unpredictable. But there is yet another possibility, that the library's survival might have led to collapse, not progress. Imagine if knowledge of lost civilizations, Atlantis, Lemuria, or others was preserved there. Suppose these records described cataclysms, technologies, or powers beyond comprehension. The temptation to rediscover them might have consumed empires. Obsession might have diverted resources, sparking endless wars for ancient secrets. Knowledge can enlighten, but it can also corrupt. Consider nuclear power. In our world, it emerged in the 20th century, born of physics centuries in the making. If Alexandrian scrolls had described principles of atomic energy, Rome or Persia might have pursued them, long before the ethics or infrastructure to wield them existed. A premature discovery could have annihilated civilizations, ending history before it began. Parallel histories also reshaped geopolitics. If the library had survived, the flow of knowledge would not have been centered in Europe alone. Perhaps Africa, with Egypt as its intellectual heart, would have remained the center of global learning. Perhaps Persia, inheriting Alexandrian scrolls, would have risen to lead a scientific golden age. Perhaps China, in dialogue through preserved trade records, would have fused its own innovations with Mediterranean science, creating a world empire of knowledge. The world we know, a Europe-centered Renaissance, followed by colonial empires, might never have unfolded. Instead, knowledge might have diffused more evenly, creating a global civilization centuries earlier, a balance of powers rather than domination by one. Odd fact, in the Abbasid Caliphate, the House of Wisdom in Baghdad became a beacon of learning, translating Greek texts into Arabic. If the Library of Alexandria had survived, Baghdad scholars might have inherited not fragments, but the whole. The Islamic Golden Age might have reached heights beyond imagination jet engines. Algebra refined further, perhaps even spacefaring ambitions. In one parallel history, humanity might have landed on the moon, not under the banner of the Cold War, but beneath the crescent of Baghdad 1,000 years earlier. Yet for all the speculation, one truth remains. Parallel histories are fragile. A single ember destroyed the library, and with it, all these paths. We cannot know whether they would have led to utopia or catastrophe. Perhaps the survival of the library would have advanced us beyond war, beyond scarcity. Or perhaps it would have ended us long ago. The burning of Alexandria reminds us that history is not inevitable. It is contingent, shaped by survival and loss. The future we live in is only one among countless others that might have been. Picture now a forked road stretching back through time. On one branch, the library burns, and humanity wanders through centuries of forgetting and rediscovery. On another, it survives, and history races forward into wonders or collapses under its own weight. Both roads feel possible. Both roads feel haunting. The Great Library exists now only in memory, but its absence shapes us as much as its survival might have. We are the children not of its knowledge, but of its loss. And in imagining parallel histories, we glimpse not only what could have been, but what still might be, if we learn to guard the fragile flame of knowledge that remains. The Great Library is gone. Its shelves turned to ash, its scrolls dissolved into silence. And yet, fragments remain like ghosts, lingering at the edge of vision. We do not see the fullness of what was lost, only its shadows, flickering through quotations, scattered copies, or passing references. It is as though a vast symphony has been destroyed, and all we hear are a few surviving notes, carried across centuries. Consider Sophocles, the Greek tragedian. He is said to have written more than 100 plays. Today, we have 7 complete. The rest are ghosts, surviving only in scraps quoted by others. A single line here, a single phrase there. From these fragments, we sense the scale of his lost voice, but never its fullness. Did the Library of Alexandria once hold his complete works, safely copied, waiting to outlast time? Or take the philosopher Democritus, who conceived of atoms 2,000 years before modern science proved them. We possess only scattered references to his writings, passed down by others. His detailed treatises, his reasoning, his experiments gone. What remains is a shadow of thought that could have altered the course of science if preserved intact. Odd fact, the Roman encyclopedist Pliny the Elder mentioned hundreds of authors whose works we no longer have. Their names survive only because he cited them. Their books, their discoveries, their voices are lost echoes without substance. There are also the fragments of historians. Berossus, the Babylonian priest, wrote histories of Mesopotamia that combined myth with record, stretching back into ages before known kings. Manto, the Egyptian priest, compiled king lists reaching into thousands of years of rule. Most of their works survive only in quotations, often filtered through hostile or skeptical eyes. What would we see if the library had preserved their complete accounts? Might we read history not as 5,000 years, but as 10 or 20, unfolding across forgotten dynasties and civilizations? Odd microstory? Sappho, the poet of Lesbos, once filled volumes with her lyric verses, celebrated in antiquity as the 10th muse. Today, we have only fragments lines scratched on broken pottery, verses quoted by later writers. Her voice comes to us like whispers carried by the wind, incomplete yet haunting. Imagine if Alexandria's scribes had copied her entire works, preserving her voice as clearly as Homer's. The ghosts would have flesh, the whispers, a song. Even in science, ghosts remain. Archimedes, the genius of Syracuse, wrote treatises on mechanics, geometry, and even proto-calculus. Many of his works are gone, their existence known only from titles listed in later catalogs. 1. The method of mechanical theorems survived only as a palimpsest, hidden beneath a monk's prayers. How many other scrolls of Archimedes once lined Alexandria's shelves? How many might have reshaped mathematics centuries earlier? There are tantalizing hints in the margins of history. Strabo, the geographer, mentioned maps and charts of lands beyond the known world. Did he draw upon Alexandrian sources? Could copies of ancient voyages, perhaps even transoceanic ones, have been stored in the library? If so, we have inherited only the faintest outline, the shadow of an older cartography erased by time. The ghosts of knowledge remind us of scale. For every surviving manuscript, there may have been dozens that perished. For every known author, 100 unnamed. When we imagine the Library of Alexandria intact, we imagine these ghosts given form again. Sophocles with a full chorus of plays, Sappho with her complete verses, Democritus explaining atoms in detail, Archimedes pushing mathematics centuries forward, entire civilizations speaking in their own words rather than through broken fragments. But the ghosts also remind us of silence. The fragments that survive only sharpen the absence. They tell us not just what we have, but what we do not. The scraps of Sappho show us how much beauty is gone. The single lines of lost tragedies show us how much drama has been erased. The references to vanished sciences show us how much discovery might have been delayed. Odd fact, the philosopher Chrysippus, founder of Stoicism's later school, wrote more than 700 books. Not one survives complete. We know his thought only through quotations by others. 700 voices silenced into whispers. Perhaps Alexandria held them. Perhaps, had they endured, Stoicism would have guided the world differently. Ghosts of knowledge drift across history like smoke. They remind us of fire, of loss, of fragility. And they remind us that the Great Library was not only a building, but a chance to hold back the tide of forgetting, to preserve voices that otherwise dissolved into silence. That chance was lost. What remains are echoes, lines quoted in margins, fragments on broken pots, half-remembered names in other books. They are enough to remind us of what once was, but never enough to restore it. The ghosts of knowledge are both haunting and hopeful. Haunting because they show us how much is gone. Hopeful because even the faintest fragment can cross millennia and reach us still. If a single line of Sappho can endure 2,500 years, what else might yet lie buried, waiting to be found? Night falls across the ancient Mediterranean. The waves of the harbor shimmer with moonlight, and above, the sky blooms with constellations. For the people of antiquity, the stars were not only lights, but mysteries, guides for sailors, omens for kings, stories for poets. Yet hidden among those constellations lay something greater, the promise of a future that stretched beyond Earth itself. The Great Library of Alexandria might have been the key to unlocking that promise. In its scrolls were the seeds of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering, the very disciplines that, centuries later, would carry humanity into the heavens. If the library had endured, could we have touched the stars long before our own time? Ancient astronomy already brushed against truths rediscovered much later. Aristarchus of Samos proposed that the Earth revolved around the Sun nearly 2,000 years before Copernicus revived the idea. Hipparchus compiled star catalogs with remarkable accuracy, tracking precession and the shifting heavens. Babylonian tablets recorded eclipses with mathematical precision. Egyptian priests aligned temples to solstices, marking celestial cycles with stone. If all these traditions had been gathered, preserved, and studied in Alexandria, the framework for a true heliocentric model might have solidified centuries earlier. With that model, navigation would have improved, calendars would have sharpened, and science would have leapt ahead. 1,000 years of astronomical delay might have vanished. Odd fact, the Antikythera mechanism, discovered in a shipwreck, revealed ancient knowledge of gears and celestial computation. It could predict eclipses, model planetary cycles, and track time with astonishing sophistication. Scholars believe it was not unique. If the library had preserved detailed manuals of such devices, humanity might have mastered mechanical computers centuries earlier, tools capable of guiding explorers, predicting seasons, or perhaps even calculating trajectories beyond Earth. Mathematics, too, might have been centuries ahead. Archimedes nearly grasped the principles of calculus. Indian mathematicians developed early concepts of zero and infinity. Chinese scholars explored complex equations. Imagine all of these traditions unified under Alexandrian scribes, copied and compared. Calculus, probability, and algebra might have matured in the first millennium, not the second. Physics would have followed. With mathematics to describe motion and force, the path to rockets might not have been so long. The leap from theory to practice would have depended on engineering. Hero of Alexandria's steam-powered devices were treated as curiosities. But with preserved knowledge of metallurgy, chemistry, and mechanics, they might have become prototypes of engines, turbines, and pumps. If industry had risen in Rome or Byzantium, with energy harnessed not by slaves, but by machines, the leap to propulsion would not have been unthinkable. By the Middle Ages, rockets perhaps crude at first, then refined might have pierced the sky. One parallel history envisions monks not illuminating manuscripts in candlelight, but charting the stars through telescopes centuries before Galileo. Astronomers could have tracked planetary orbits with precision. Engineers could have crafted lenses and mirrors, and mathematicians could have plotted trajectories. By the year 1000, Europe, China, or the Islamic world might have shared not only trade routes, but knowledge routes leading toward the heavens. Odd micro-story. In the 9th century, Chinese inventors created gunpowder. Combined with knowledge preserved from Alexandria, this might have fueled not only weapons, but propulsion. A world in which the library survived could have seen rockets rise not in the 20th century, but in the first millennium. Imagine towers in Baghdad or Constantinople serving as launch sites, flames rising against the night. Yet speculation raises questions. Would humanity have been ready? Would medieval societies, still bound by kings and empires, have used the heavens for exploration or for domination? A spacecraft in the 11th century might not have carried explorers, but soldiers. The race to the stars might have been not a scientific dream, but an imperial conquest. Still, there is wonder in imagining it. Picture the year 1200, not crusaders clashing over Jerusalem, but scholars of Alexandria's preserved legacy constructing observatories, charting the moon, perhaps launching the first satellites. Picture the Renaissance not beginning with paintings and rediscovered texts, but with telescopes, orbit, and interplanetary ambition. Humanity might have stepped onto the moon before Shakespeare ever wrote his plays. The library's survival might also have changed our philosophy of the cosmos. Preserved scrolls may have contained not only calculations, but myths, cosmologies, and lost philosophies describing humanity's place among the stars. Perhaps Egyptian records stretched back to epochs when the constellations were different, carrying whispers of an older memory. Perhaps Babylonian texts spoke of cycles of destruction and renewal written in the heavens. Such ideas, preserved, might have framed humanity's exploration not only as conquest, but as spiritual journey. Odd fact, the philosopher Anaxagoras, long before Christ, proposed that the moon was a rocky world, lit by the sun. His ideas were dismissed, forgotten, and rediscovered. If preserved in Alexandria, they might have inspired generations to see the heavens not as unreachable lights, but as places destinations. The age of stars, had it begun earlier, might have reshaped everything. Empires would not only rise on Earth, but reach beyond it. Trade might stretch across planets, as once it stretched across seas. The great cathedrals of Europe might stand beside launch towers. Exploration might not have stopped at the New World, but leapt to other worlds. And yet, we must acknowledge the danger. An early space age might have burned as quickly as it rose. Without the foundation of modern science, mistakes could have been catastrophic. Rockets may have exploded, empires may have collapsed, knowledge may have been lost again. Progress is not only invention, but stability, and perhaps our timeline, slow, uneven, delayed, was the safer one. Still, the dream lingers. The Great Library, intact, might have carried us to the stars long before our age. The fire that consumed it was not just a loss of words, but a delay in destiny. We are a species born beneath the stars, forever drawn to them. And perhaps, in another history, we have already walked among them for 1,000 years. The silence of the night sky above Alexandria reminds us of what might have been, the possibility that, had memory survived, the constellations would be less mystery and more map, less myth and more milestone. The Great Library of Alexandria no longer stands. Its scrolls have turned to ash, its shells to dust. And yet, in a paradox both haunting and profound, it survives. Not in walls or papyrus, but in imagination. Across centuries, the library has become less a building and more a symbol, a ghostly cathedral of knowledge that shapes how we dream about the past and how we long for the future. Writers have invoked it as a metaphor for infinity. Jorge Luis Borges imagined a universe itself as a library, endless hexagonal halls filled with all possible books, some meaningful, some gibberish. His vision echoes Alexandria, the dream of completeness, the desire to gather everything humanity has ever thought. The library becomes not just a place, but a mirror of the human mind, vast, restless, yearning for totality. Philosophers have seen in it a warning. The fragility of papyrus against flame reminds us that knowledge is never guaranteed. What perished in Alexandria teaches us that civilization can regress, that enlightenment can vanish overnight. Each time we digitize texts, archive data, or build repositories, we are haunted by Alexandria's shadow. Our cloud servers and global networks are, in their way, modern libraries built to resist the burning of time. Odd fact, the word library itself carries Alexandria's ghost. Every grand collection, from the Library of Congress to the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, traces its lineage back to that vanished dream. Even the internet has been described as a modern Alexandria, an attempt to gather all knowledge in one place. Yet always the fear lingers. What if it too can burn, not with fire, but with neglect, censorship, or collapse? The library also inspires science. Carl Sagan, in his Cosmos series, mourned its loss as one of history's greatest tragedies. He imagined what might have been, had its scrolls endured, interstellar ships by now, cures for diseases long since mastered, centuries of progress gained. His lament is not only for the past, but for the future that never came. Through him and others, the library has become a shorthand for lost potential, a reminder of how fragile the path of knowledge truly is. In art, the library is often imagined as a place of wonder-towering shelves, scrolls glowing in lamplight, scholars wandering through vast halls. Painters, filmmakers, and novelists return to it again and again, as though rebuilding it in imagination might restore what was lost. It is depicted as both sanctuary and tragedy, a dream of what humanity might achieve, and a reminder of how easily dreams can be destroyed. Odd micro-story. In Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose, the hidden labyrinthine library at the heart of the monastery is a direct echo of Alexandria, a place where knowledge is both preserved and endangered, where fire threatens to consume wisdom once more. Fiction, in this way, continues to restage the burning, warning us that forgetting is always closer than we think. The myth of Alexandria also shapes our ambitions. Projects like the Human Genome Project, the Google Books Initiative, and the construction of massive digital archives are, in essence, attempts to rebuild what was lost. Each tries to gather knowledge comprehensively, as the Ptolemies once did. The difference is scale. Now, instead of papyrus scrolls, we seek to preserve exabytes of data. Yet the spirit is the same, an unquenchable desire to hold everything in one place. And still, the specter of fragility remains. Servers can fail. Systems can be corrupted. Even digital knowledge is vulnerable to time. We may not fear fire as the ancients did, but we face new forms of erasure. Alexandria lives in the modern mind as both a dream and a warning, urging us to guard knowledge not only by collecting it, but by ensuring it endures. Cultural memory also elevates the library into myth. In some accounts, it was destroyed once, in others, many times. Each retelling reshapes it. Caesar's flames, Christian decrees, Caliph Omar's orders. The truth is uncertain, but the ambiguity itself has become part of the legend. The library is less a fixed event than a recurring story, told again and again to remind us of the precariousness of memory. When we speak of the library today, we rarely mean papyrus or scholars in robes. We mean the hunger for completeness, the fragility of progress, the tragedy of loss. We mean the possibility that within a single building, in a single fire, entire futures were erased. And we mean, too, the hope that by remembering Alexandria, we might avoid repeating its fate. The library in the modern mind is thus both absence and presence, a building that is no longer there, but which still casts a shadow across our collective imagination. It is an empty shelf that shapes the shelves we build today. In the end, the Great Library survives not in papyrus, but in story. We tell it again and again because it is more than history, it is archetype. It embodies our deepest fears and greatest hopes, that knowledge can be lost, but also that knowledge can be sought, preserved, and shared. In every archive, in every data server, in every library built since, Alexandria whispers to us still. The Great Library of Alexandria is gone. Its shelves are empty, its scrolls consumed. Yet in a paradox only history can hold, it still endures. Not in its stones or papyrus, but in memory, in myth, in the silence it left behind. The library has become less a place than a wound and absence, so vast that we still feel its gravity 2,000 years later. It is the memory of ash, and ash, in its own way, remembers. When fire touches a manuscript, it does not only destroy. It leaves a trace, a whisper. Blackened fragments reveal that words once lived there. The library's destruction is like that, a shadow that reminds us of the worlds erased. Each lost scroll was not just ink on papyrus, but a mind preserved, a lineage of thought. Each flame that consumed it was not only fire, but forgetting. The echo we inherit is not of the scrolls themselves, but of their absence, a silence louder than any record. Civilizations rise, empires fall, but knowledge is more fragile than stone. The pyramids endure beneath the desert sun. The Parthenon still stands on its hill. But the words, the thoughts, the discoveries of countless minds vanish in a moment of flame or neglect. Papyrus is lighter than stone, easier to carry, yet infinitely more perishable. What Alexandria teaches is that memory is as mortal as flesh, and that every archive is a living thing, vulnerable to fire, war, and time. Odd fact, a single medieval scribe, copying a text by hand, often made the difference between survival and oblivion. Entire philosophies survived because one monk in one cloister chose to copy a manuscript rather than leave it to rot. A slip of the hand could erase a word. A decision not to copy could erase a book. Civilization hangs not on inevitability, but on fragile acts of preservation. Alexandria as fall reminds us that even the grandest efforts to collect knowledge can vanish in a single season of chaos. The long memory of ash is not only about loss, it is also about possibility. For in imagining what was lost, we awaken to what might still be hidden. Buried libraries, forgotten archives, sealed caves, each holds the chance of rediscovery. From the sands of Egypt have emerged papyri long thought gone. From the lava of Herculaneum, scrolls still lie entombed, waiting for technologies that can read them without unrolling. Each fragment recovered is a reminder that history is not finished, that memory can sometimes be coaxed back from silence. And yet, the absence looms larger. The Great Library stands as a reminder that human progress is not linear, but fragile, that the light of knowledge can flicker, fade, and vanish, that we are always a fire, a war, or a collapse away from forgetting who we were. Our modern archives feel permanent, etched in stone, encoded in servers, but the lesson of Alexandria is caution. Servers crash, networks fail, even digital clouds can dissipate. The ash of history warns us that knowledge must be guarded, renewed, and passed on not once, but always. But there is something hauntingly beautiful, too, in the library's absence. It has become a canvas for imagination, an unfinished story inviting countless endings. Writers, historians, and dreamers have filled its empty shelves with visions of what might have been: cures, machines, voyages, philosophies. The library lives not in papyrus, but in possibility. It whispers to us that we are not the first to dream of completeness, and perhaps not the last to lose it. Odd micro story. In Borges' tale, The Library of Babel, the universe itself is imagined as an endless library. Within it lie all possible books, all possible combinations of letters. Most are meaningless, but among them, scattered like stars, are true works of genius. Borges knew the paradox, that completeness may be as overwhelming as absence. And yet, the dream persists, as it did in Alexandria. A memory of ash does not silence imagination, it ignites it. The long memory of ash also raises a question that lingers like smoke. What else have we lost? If one library's fall erased centuries of progress, how many other libraries vanished unremembered? How many voices lie beneath deserts, oceans, ruins? The silence of history is vast, and Alexandria is only its most famous wound. Every forgotten text, every burnt manuscript, every buried tablet widens the silence. What we call history is only a fraction, a shadow of what once was. And if so much is gone, what remains unseen? Perhaps truths that could change our understanding of the world still lie hidden. Perhaps entire civilizations remain unknown because their words are gone. Perhaps memory itself is only ever partial, reconstructed from fragments, never whole. And yet, in this fragility lies responsibility. The Great Library calls to us not merely to mourn, but to protect what we have, to copy, to preserve, to imagine, to ensure that the long memory of ash does not claim our own age as well. Every act of preservation, every archive built, every story told is a defiance of forgetting. As the documentary closes, imagine the harbor of Alexandria at twilight. The lighthouse stands, casting its beam across the sea. The city hums with life. Somewhere within, scholars walk among shelves heavy with scrolls, the air filled with the rustle of papyrus. This vision is not real, and yet it lives within us, a dream of knowledge unbroken, a world unburned. And then, silence. The vision fades. Only the ash remains, and the memory it carries. The Great Library of Alexandria endures as the most haunting reminder in human history. That knowledge is fragile, and every fire erases worlds. But it also endures as a question, whispered across centuries. What else lies forgotten, waiting to be found?